I will state real quick, we do have a quorum, and I want to read this real quick so hopefully Dr. Trampy will be able to participate depending on our vote. But I was contacted by Supervisor Trampy, and he would like to be able to, he would not be able to physically attend, at least at this time, and if not the whole board meeting, due to the traffic on 95 South being a standstill by overturned tractor trailer in Stafford County. He would like to participate remotely from his vehicle by phone. I would like to call for approval of Dr. Trampy's remote participation in the meeting, and it would be a majority vote. Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Chair's aye. All right. So Dr. Trampy will be on with us. All right. If everybody please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance by Mr. Ross, followed by the invocation by myself.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lord, I just want to thank you for this day, and thank you for every day that you bless us with. I ask that you be with this board tonight, particularly. We're making some hard decisions that will affect this county. Please be with us. Guide us. Allow us to hear one another and to make the right decisions. I also ask that you be with all the folks recovering from Hurricane Florence due at this time. Encourage them, strengthen them, and give them hope. Same with our county residents who are struggling. Be with them, and lead each neighbor that can give time to recognize this trouble and to reach out to his or her neighbor. In your name and your glory we pray. Amen. Mr. Taylor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. First item is the approval of your agenda. There are no items in the bullpen.
Have a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve.
All right. Motion by Mr. McLaughlin to approve the agenda. Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Chair, aye. Oh, Dr. Trampy, sorry. I'm going to leave you out probably all night, but.
Voted aye.
All right.
Excellent. First, we have public presentations, Mr. Chairman. Amy, do we have anyone signed up?
Yes, several.
Public presentation guidelines are as follows, folks. Public presentations are an opportunity for citizens to present matters that you believe deserve the board's attention. Presentations are not part of a public hearing. Sign up to speak at each public hearing is separate. Public presentations are one-way comments from you to the Board of Supervisors. This is not a forum for dialogue or debate. To make a public presentation, please sign up on the provided sign-up sheet and please print clearly for our record. Come to the lectern when your name is called. Clearly state your name, address, and voting district for our record. Address your comments directly to the Board of Supervisors. State whether you're speaking on your own behalf, in which case you'll have 3 minutes to speak, or on behalf of a group, in which case you'll have 5 minutes to speak. Public presentations shall not be used to address matters subject to public hearings or to make political campaign speeches, private advertisements, or personal attacks. Your written.
Good evening. My name is Russ Mueller, reside in the Livingston District 10819 Parent Circle. I speak to you tonight for the Concerned Citizens Group with a renewed sense of urgency. We're disturbed and disappointed that a planning commission hearing is being pushed for as early as November on this ginormous S-Power project without a site plan providing details on how they intend to fix the significant financial, environmental, and health risks we've demonstrated to you over many months. As you know, there are many constituents beyond our group who flat out oppose the project and demanding accountability. In contrast, our group has taken the high road to present you with legally specific, well-researched, and grounded scientific evidence of the substantial risks, as well as specific engineering steps that can be taken to mitigate them. You all should have on your desks our latest conditions document then that we demand be included in the special use permit. Without them, all county residents stand to lose and most immediately may face tax increases to pay for any new county infrastructure that might be required. To steamroll this process ahead without demanding a detailed site plan before a staff report is delivered to the Planning Commission, in our opinion, is a height of irresponsibility to the long-term health, fiscal health of the county and to the citizens. I think the public deserves an opportunity to analyze the details, not just the ephemeral promises and maybes that are made behind closed doors. For example, we want details that show whether undeveloped Fawn Lake property will be purchased for S-Power and the use of it. Going to use our roads now? And details on how county and well water will be obtained and effectively capped. Fact, forging ahead without detailed means of mitigation is pure folly. We cannot believe a word about the project, and statements made to me and even the SEC were less than forthcoming, to say the least. For example, they said their presence would not be expanded beyond 500 megawatts. Now we see they applied to PGM for 800 megawatts, an additional 300 megawatts. Yes, sir, let's just gobble up even more of the county, 2,000 or 3,000 acres more while we just sit here. When is action going to be taken to prevent the entire county from being papered over with solar panels? We warned of this 6 months ago when the board and planning commission took up the comprehensive plan. We asked then for provisions, prevent new energy projects from being positioned within 30, 40 miles of the last one, and there be a limit on the total land the county converted to solar. This one is 2.5% itself. With 300, you're talking 4% or more of the county being taken over by solar panels. I previously sat on an ancillary board in another Virginia county and warned then about the threat of millions of dollars of galloping unfunded retirement liabilities. Fortunately, that county listened to our recommendations, and as a result, they have perhaps the only fully funded public employee retirement system in the nation. For months, we've been warning about the environmental and fiscal risks of this project. If this project goes badly, they could walk away and stick the county with a galloping $40 to $50 million unfunded liability to deconstruct a potentially toxic waste site. You have our recommendations to prevent this. I think everyone in the county should wake up and wise up about the substantial risks of this project, 6 times the size of Lake Anna nuclear power plant. We ask, we urge, we plead you direct your staff to include our recommended conditions to mitigate all of these financial and health and environmental risks. Thank you, and we'll be watching closely to see what action you take on the special.
Sir, your time's up. Thank you.
Sean Fogarty, followed by Kevin McCarthy.
Sean Fogarty, Livingston District. The conditions that we have requested include 6 related to the decommission and site restoration plan. These are supported by the County Code Solar Energy Facility provision, which provides very specific standards of review for solar energy facilities. About half of that ordinance deals with decommissioning. Our major concerns on decommissioning are the cost to decommission and the amount, which determines the amount of the surety equivalent or bond, and also who will be issuing that bond. S-Power's first decommissioning estimate provided to the county was $1.3 million. This is to decommission a 500 megawatt, $550 million plant with 1.8 million solar panels. The estimate exhibited a shocking lack of attention to detail and caused many to question their credibility. After being challenged by the county, S-Power submitted a new plan, estimating a total cost of decommissioning of just over $5 million. This revised estimate contained numerous errors and faulty assumptions. The plan included extensive recycling revenue assumptions that were not documented. The plan assumed a 25-year project life, not the 35-year life that S-Power is proposing, and it only assumed reclamation of 1,200
recycled solar panels. The Jinko panels that S-Power plans to use weigh 58.4 pounds. Clean Lights does not recycle cadmium telluride panels. So depending on the applicant's mix of cadmium telluride versus crystalline silicon panels, there will be a cost of at least $10 million to recycle the panels, and it could be several times larger. For example, estimating, say, half cadmium telluride and half silicon, 900,000 cadmium telluride panels at $650 a piece, $5.8 million. 900,000 crystalline silicon panels at 58 pounds each, and no market currently exists. PV modules contain silver, lead, and other hazardous materials in addition to cadmium telluride. There are more than 50,000 different crystalline silicon module types on the market. Where is going to be the efficiency in recycling? As the county has now retained consultants for this application, we strongly urge that they be directed to investigate the recycling and restoration costs, and that the surety bond required of the applicants be sufficient enough to guarantee that there is no burden on the county nor cost to the taxpayers. And as you'll see, this information is consistent with and supports the recommended SUP conditions that were submitted to you.
Thank you, sir. Your time has expired. Thank you.
Jim Smith, followed by Alfred King.
Good evening. Jim Smith, Livingston District. I'm here to speak on behalf of the concerned citizens of Spotsylvania County. We believe that the Spotsylvania County and its citizens can only be protected from harm if the 3 special use permits contain specific conditions to prevent and to mitigate such harm. The requested conditions related to the use of county water and well drilling and the prohibition of the extraction of industrial levels of water. These are, number 1, require that the total water volume obtained from all wells drilled on sites A, B, and C in the already stressed local aquifer be limited to no more than 300 gallons per month, as would be required by state law if the sites were located just a few miles east on the other side of Route 95, to the extent that the results of drilling tests demonstrate such extraction will not cause harm to the aquifer at such levels. Number 2, require the metering of any wells drilled in the county and monthly reporting to the county. Number 3, require, before construction begins, the installation of a monitoring well for each well positioned so as to accurately monitor on a daily basis, with reporting daily, weekly, monthly as necessary, the water levels in the aquifer from which the water will be extracted. Number 4, include provisions enabling the county to obtain information related to the wells and water extraction at any time and to order a reduction or cessation of the extraction of well water if the applicant violates the extraction limitations, if the monitoring data shows that the aquifer has or is likely to be negatively impacted, if water were to be extracted at previous levels, and if drought conditions reasonably warrant such a reduction or cessation. Number 5, require that tests related to any proposed wells, including step tests for performance, analysis, aquifer drilling, testing, and analysis for depth, water quality, and sustainability in drought and other conditions, be complete and sufficient to assess the vulnerability of the aquifer and non-harmful levels of water extraction. Number 6, require a study of and fully engineered plan for any proposed use of county water, followed by a review by an independent engineering expert to certify that the upgrades, changes in water lines, pumps, connections, etc., at a level of peak daily, weekly, monthly use will not negatively impact county water reserves or existing county water service to Fawn Lake and other areas of the county, and require the reduction of cessation of county water when specified conditions occur, such as a diminution of county water reserves during droughts, ensure that county residents are not charged and do not suffer tax increases for any of the above described changes, and that the applicant is charged for water usage in the same manner as other consumers. Number 8, require the applicant to consider alternative sources of obtaining water for construction and operations such as settlement ponds, bioswales, and other means described in the GeoSeer LLC report dated April 13th, 2018, previously submitted to the county, in order to reduce stress on the local aquifer and county water resources. Number 9, require any water treatment facilities on the site to meet reasonable standards to prevent harm to neighboring and the environment. And number 10, ensure that any water tanks are not visible from any adjoining properties. The last time I spoke here, I indicated that a physician has a responsibility to do no harm and to protect their patients. You have a responsibility as our board to protect your constituents and do no harm to the people that reside in Spotsylvania County, and I hope you will do your job. Thank you.
Alfred King, followed by Kathleen Hayden.
Alfred King, 11102 Fawn Lake Parkway, Livingston District. I'm speaking for myself as an individual who has had literally 50 years of valuation experience. I am undertaking a valuation study to determine whether there will be a net income to the county or a net expense to the county of the solar farm. I am not yet finished on this study, but it would appear on a preliminary basis that the taxpayers of Spotsylvania County are going to be asked to pay an increase in the tax rate to offset the decrease that's going to come from the installation of the solar farm and the negative impact on local property values. There's absolutely no question that the solar farm will not increase property values. I've never heard anybody say that, boy, I'm really glad this solar farm is here because my property values are going to go up. The fact is the property values are going to go down. When they go down, the assessed values go down. When the assessed values go down, the tax revenue goes down. So I have not yet completed the study. When it is finished, I will present it to you. But I want you to start thinking in terms of a net cash cost outlay for this solar farm. Thank you.
Kathleen Hayden, followed by Michael O'Beer.
Hello, my name is Kathleen Hayden. I live in Livingston District, 11414 Seymour Lane, and I'm a realtor. I'd like to express my concerns about the proposed solar farm's impact on property values and county tax revenue. I recently had buyers contact me to see homes for sale, one off West Catharpin, the other off Post Oak Road. It's my job to help them make an informed purchase, so I gave them the county map of the S-Power sites. Based on that, they decided not to see the homes. It was not an issue of losing their view. What worried them was the size of the project and the unknown environmental and health risks associated with a solar farm of this size. They don't want to live near or have to try to resell a home with potential problems. They would rather buy somewhere else. I reviewed the studies I could find on the effect solar farms have on property values. I found several, but the problem is that there's not one study that comes close to the circumstances we have here in Spotsylvania County. The studies I found were of solar farms ranging in size from 13 to 160 acres. The Spotsylvania site, of course, is 6,350 acres, 40 times the larger of these studies. Our situation is unique in the size of the solar farm, unique in the number of homes potentially affected, and unique in the median prices of the homes. There was one North Carolina study, also of a smaller solar farm of 42 acres, but strikingly similar to us in that it was built on agricultural land adjacent to a lake community of 400 estate homes. This study showed a 30% drop in the value of the homes directly adjacent to the solar farm. A 30% drop in the value of the approximately 50 Fawn Lake homes directly adjacent to the solar farm would equal $67,000 of lost tax revenue per year. There are also 126 building lots on the south side of Fawn Lake, close to the solar farm. The developer is negotiating the sale of 74 of these to S Power. I believe this is because they know that once the solar farm is built, these lots will be nearly impossible to sell. If these 126 homes are never built, that will be a loss of approximately $567,000 per year in tax revenue. The loss of these lots alone costs the county more than it will gain even at the highest estimate of earnings from the solar farm. And if my experience with the buyers for the Catharpin Road and Post Oak Road homes reflect the future for buyers' opinions, I'm afraid the impact on property values and revenue loss will greatly exceed this. It's my belief that the county has much more to lose than to gain in approving the special use permit, and I would like to see it completely denied. Thank you.
Michael O'Beer, followed by Michelle Trampy.
My name is Michael O'Beer, live at 11201 Chancellor Meadows Lane, ground zero for this project. My house is 50 foot off the property line. I asked last time, I said, who will pay for my well when it goes dry? So far, I haven't been told anything. What the S-Power does on their property should not cost us, the taxpayers of Spotsylvania County, money. Does anyone know that the special incentive from the Energy Department gives S-Power a double incentive? They double everything the state gives them. So that makes more money for them off of the incentives from the state and the county. That just gives them more money to destroy Spotsylvania County. So I'd like to give you a quote from President Eisenhower that stated that the world moves on ideas. The ideas that were good once aren't always good. The other one is, a sound nation is built of individuals in sound mind and body and spirit. Government dare not ignore the individual citizens. Thank you.
Michelle Trampy, followed by Mike Smith.
Good evening. My name is Michelle Trampy, 11316 Tyrell Court, Salem District. I'm a member of the Social Services Advisory Board, but I'm speaking tonight for myself. Over the last few months, there have been public discussions concerning decisions made by Spotsylvania Social Services and its management that I wanted to address with you this evening. My comments are not to be taken as advocating for any specific outcome of any case because I appropriately believe that the courts and judges involved in CPS cases are in the best positions to finally decide them. My specific concerns are with how the Social Services Director and her staff have been portrayed publicly, especially online, for many months. I have not spoken previously because I did not wish for the bullying that appears to be inflicted on the director and her staff really to be turned on me. This is my own failing, and I owe them an apology to the director and her staff for not involving myself sooner, but I am here now. For months, the Social Services Director and her staff have been subjected to the worst comments and accusations about their decisions relating to a particular case, but unable to respond or provide their side of the story due to state and federal law. Yet that did not stop some from assigning nefarious motives to their decisions. I have no reason to believe that the director or her staff came to incorrect conclusions regarding any case. Consider that if any actions are taken against the director or her staff, it may be very embarrassing for the county when the Virginia Department of Social Services reviews the situation. I have been on the Social Services Advisory Board for almost 3 years now, and to my recollection, no concerns regarding the management and direction of social services has been brought to our attention from the Board of Supervisors other than to request over the last few months we do an investigation of a specific case which we are prevented from doing by state law. In my time on the Social Services Advisory Board, the Director of Social Services and her staff have been courteous, transparent, professional, and responsive. If there were concerns, I'm surprised that we were not engaged sooner, particularly given one of you sits on the board with me. The social services director and her staff have to make judgment calls, and in child welfare cases, if they get it wrong, a child may be in danger, and the director can be held responsible. She should not be subjected to harassment or bullying, and county leadership should not unduly influence her professional decisions, nor should she be subject to retaliation. Please think about the workplace environment created if bullying and retaliation are tolerated without rebuke, particularly by county leadership. Also think about negative consequences of specific child welfare cases being decided by lobbying and politics. Thank you for listening. I'm finished for tonight.
Mike Smith, followed by Kathleen Hollywood.
My name is Michael Smith. I live at 9003 Chancery Court, Livingston District. Supervisor Benson is my supervisor. And I'll be speaking on behalf of the Fredericksburg, Virginia Patriots. And I am the treasurer, and I'll be speaking. After a detailed review of the circumstances concerning the Buckley family and the removal of the child and subsequent legal battles with the Spotsylvania County Department of Social Services, the Fredericksburg, Virginia Patriots declare the following. The behavior and position of the Spotsylvania County Department of Social Services, DSS, towards the case of 30-month-old Juan Antonio Buckley, who was removed from the care of his parents, John and Elma Buckley, in December of 2016, is inconsistent with the community values of Spotsylvania and appears to be influenced by prejudicial forces unknown to the county at large. John is an active duty officer in the United States Navy and the father of 9 children. The Buckley family is raising their children in a Christian household and chose to educate them outside of the public education realm, which is their parental right. There are numerous anecdotal cases where abused children have been reunited with their families, which makes this case especially confusing. Juan's medical condition, congenital, was not related to an alleged abuse or neglect. The decision was made to remove Juan Antonio Buckley from the family without being accorded the time and opportunity to consult an attorney, and while the child was recovering in the hospital. Weak criminal charges were proffered against the parents, which were dismissed by the proceeding judge in a full motion to strike action. Reassignment to qualified alternate family members was not considered by Spotsylvania County DSS. Willful delaying tactics and a follow-on civil trial will make the child eligible for adoption despite continuous action and intent of the family to retain parental rights. Spotsylvania DSS has been unresponsive to specific requests for unsupervised visitation and rational for their denial. The Fredericksburg, Virginia Patriots demand an independent investigation of the Spotsylvania County DSS and respect the decisions made in the case. This should include a review of dispositions for similar actions and any prejudgmental associations and circumstances that influence this case. We cite this action in keeping with the following core principles: protection of equality, regardless of race, sex, or creed, and accountability and transparency of all governing entities. We had our monthly meeting in the Fredericksburg, Virginia Patriots on Sunday, and we had Mr. John Buckley present, and we got to hear specifically from him. And if you haven't heard his story, then you don't know what you're talking about, whether you're sitting on the Board of Supervisors or you're sitting in the audience tonight making statements in front of the Board of Supervisors. Speak with Mr. Buckley and hear what he has to say, and after about 10 minutes, you'll understand where he's coming from. Okay? This family sought medical care for their child and had their child taken away in a military hospital. They don't avoid care. They don't withhold prescription and anything like that. They sought medical care and had their child, which we consider, kidnapped, taken away. And it has been the case for the last 18 months. This child is barely 3 years old. It doesn't recognize its mother, barely recognize its family during visitation, which is about an hour a week supervised. Imagine having to be supervised to see your own child. Okay? They had criminal cases referred to them, which a judge dropped. The child should have been removed or returned immediately at that time. So now they're having to go through civil procedures, and Captain Buckley's an active duty member of the United States Navy, trying to feed his family and serve his country. But he has to fight and fight every day to get his child back. So the other day at the Board of Supervisors meeting, a motion was made because someone wanted to talk about this. That motion was never fully ended. There was a motion made, there was a discussion, and there was no vote, Mr. Chairman, and there needed to be a vote on that because I think it would have saved the embarrassment of the board and some embarrassment from here in Spotsylvania County because people didn't know what they were talking about. So what I ask for you, Mr. Chairman, is tonight to make a motion to have that child removed or returned to its rightful family, or to conduct an investigation in this and get the child returned to their family, their whole family, the 8 other siblings and the mother and the father. Mr. Chairman, from what I understand, you have a large family. And I know you've been emotional on a lot of topics in this county, to include teacher pay, school budgets, and the need for more firefighters and police. So what I would ask you to do, and ask all the board members to do tonight, is reach into your hearts and think about how you would act and behave if you didn't have your child, and if you couldn't return your child into the arms of your wife. This shenanigan needs to end. This needs to end now. These children,
Sir,
child needs to be...
Your time has expired, Mr. Smith.
Kathleen Hollywood, followed by Vivian Stanley.
However, I spend a great deal of my waking hours in Spotsylvania County serving this community. My statements are my own and are not intended to be a representation of the Department of Social Services. Over the past several months, Gail Crooks has been constantly under fire, professionally and then personally, for holding steadfast to her integrity. It may have had the effect of giving some folks the wrong perception, and so I wanted to take a couple of minutes to portray a more accurate picture of Gail Crooks. In the time that I have served this community, I have been privileged to do so under the leadership of Mrs. Crooks. She has steadfastly kept the children, the clients, and the families of this community her #1 priority. One example of her dedication was early this past March, the day the windstorm that blew through this area. I remember that day because there were 2 children ages 10 and 12 whose adoptive parents had decided they did not want them anymore. Recognizing that this would be an extremely difficult day, Gail Crooks took on the responsibility of telling these children and of moving them to a foster home. I accompanied Mrs. Crooks to break the news to the children, to comfort them and to reassure them that this was not about them or anything that they had done wrong. When we took the children to the foster home, Mrs. Crooks would not leave the children there until she knew they were comfortable in staying. During the weekend that followed, while everyone was cleaning up from the store, Mrs. Crooks went back to the adoptive home, picked up some of the special things that the children wanted that had been left behind. She then brought them to the children. This is just one instance of what I believe exemplifies the definition of a selfless leader. Regarding her leadership in the department on a day-to-day basis, Mrs. Crooks consistently reminded us all that we are one agency serving one community. She had an open-door policy for every staff member in the agency, and she encouraged staff to come to her if they had a concern. Her guidance to supervisors was that a failure to share a concern would be a failure as a supervisor. Her message in leadership was, I need to learn from you as much as I need to support you. We have been told very recently that this Department of Social Services is one of the best in the Commonwealth. This is a true statement, and it is a no truer statement to say that this distinction is in no small part to the leadership of Gail Crooks. On the day that we found out that she was placed on administrative leave, staff came back to the department and did what Mrs. Crooks had always taught us to do, which is to serve the community to the best of our ability. Those words almost echoed in the hallways of the department that day. I believe there's no finer testament to a leader than to have instilled such a lasting message that even in her absence, the work continues. Thank you.
Vivian Stanley, followed by Kathleen Hayden.
Good evening. Unfortunately, we have to go back to the solar farm stuff. I have for you today a special use permit condition request.
State your name and voting district, please, ma'am.
Vivian Stanley, Livingston District 13411, West Catharpin. I have for you today a special use permit condition request. I gave it to a gentleman over there to pass out to you all. As you have not had a chance to read it, I will postpone discussion of it for the next meeting because it'll still be just as true next time. However, I do want to point out to you that in no way does Spotsylvania profit from the solar facility? Someone said, wow, we will receive $600,000 of tax revenue. Well, no. About half of that was being realized from the tree farm taxes. But for discussion's sake, we will say, okay, $600,000. In 2011, the census survey said there were 17,100 people in Livingston District, and this was a census that Spotsy did. That was 7 years ago. So I will estimate the population increased by 3,000 over those 7 years. So divide the $600,000 by 20,000 people. Now, are you ready for this? That gives you $30 for each person in Livingston District. That's sad. That's all that the lives of these people are worth, $30 a piece? No one in the community wants this poison in their community, in their water, their air, the soil. So, think about this. Is that $30 dollars, or is it 30 pieces of silver? You tell me. Vote no to the special permit. Your vote will clearly tell everyone you know how you regard your fellow man. Is he worth more than 30 pieces of silver, or is he worth his whole life? Thank you.
Kathleen Hayden. There are no other citizens signed up to speak.
Is there anybody that did not sign up that wishes to speak at this time? You can come forward.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Raymond Tate. I live on Robert E. Lee Drive across the street. I was here at the last meeting. I was informed by the neighbors that they're trying to rezone it again. I'm sorry I have no voice. I just had major surgery. But Collins has just had their way with senior citizens. There's 8 of us on that street. No one cares. Last time, my supervisor actually helped me. He called me, gave me his number. I could not sit out my front porch no more because of the dust. So Collins called y'all up and says, we got a water truck. Yeah, they bought a water truck. It's sitting right down
Sir,
at their entrance.
are you meaning to speak to the Keswick rezoning case?
Yes, sir.
That's on for a public hearing this evening. Your comments would be appropriate during that public hearing, but I apologize, they're not appropriate now, sir.
Okay,
If you would wait for that matter, that would be when you would speak.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Sorry.
Thank you, sir.
Is there anybody else that did not sign up for public presentations that wishes to speak at this time? See, come on forward.
My name is Bill Fedorachko. I live at 11404 Stonewall Jackson Drive. I'm a retired Army BG, and I'd like to speak on behalf of Gail Crooks. My father used to tell me there's 3 sides to every story, and I think that's the dilemma you face today. There's a lot of emotions involved. People have made a lot of statements, some of them very derogatory. I know Gail personally. She's in my Bible study class of 35 people. She's the daughter of a career military officer. One son is just entering service. Another one's a retired Marine. She's an extremely thoughtful person of impeccable integrity. Everybody in the class will vouch for that. And her office has performed admirably. Just take a look at the record. Last reporting period, met 12 of 14 performance goals or critical outcomes. Northern region only met 10 of 14. State overall was 6 of 14. So my suggestion, respectful suggestion to you, is that you dig deep for the facts, remembering that there's 3 sides to every story before you make any sort of decision. Tremendous amount of emotion involved here. Some very unfortunate things have been said which demean people and besmirch their integrity, and I leave it to your good judgment to make an informed decision. Thank you.
Is there anybody else that did not sign up that wishes to speak at this time? Seeing none, we'll close public presentations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That brings us to your consent agenda. Let me pull up the slides.
I need to read a disclosure statement, Chairman, before we start.
All right. You can go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I hereby disclose I have an interest in the consideration of changes to the retiree health care benefits as an employee of the county. My disclosure is on file with the clerk and is available to the public for review. Mark and Amy, please record this disclosure in the minutes of the meeting as required by law. Thank you.
Yes, sir. May I have the floor computer, please? There we go. This evening's consent agenda is as follows. Number 1 is the approval of the August 14, 2018 board meeting minutes. Second is the approval of the 2020 budget calendar. Third is the approval of contract renewal to Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield for medical, dental, vision, and EAP insurance services. This is the third renewal for optional 4 additional 1-year terms. This is the third of 4. Item 4 is the approval of a purchase order to Lake Enterprises, Inc. for the purchase of ambulances. That's 2 ambulances, total cost $552,698. Item 5 is the approval of a purchase order to Physio Control Incorporated for the purchase of life packs. These are 8 life packs for a total of $265,785.05. Item 6 is a business tangible property refund to Northeast Real Estate LLC in the amount of $2,822.33. Item 7 is a budget adjustment for actual cost of the second year of our compensation and longevity implementation. Total budget impact is an adjustment of $267,076. Item 8 is a HR policy revisions to Chapter 10, the retiree health care benefits changes. This is the policy prepared as directed by the board at your last meeting. Item 9 is proclamation regarding Gail Perkins, the SANE program coordinator at Mary Washington Hospital, recognizing her service on the occasion of her retirement. Item 10 the recommended revisions to the Public Safety Committee bylaws to remove the term limitations for rotating members. Item 11 is the reappointment of Ernest Bartosh to the Public Safety Committee for a term that expires September 25 of 2020. Item 12 is a request to obtain board approval for a new electronic voting system to have $5,000 budgeted in the FY19 budget. Item 13 are resolutions for improvements to Monument Court and Nob Hill Court. These are cul-de-sacs in Bloomsbury subdivision. They were approved in the adopted FY19 to 23 CIP, and these resolutions are routine to move forward with their improvement. And that is your consent agenda for today.
Mr. Skinner.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move approval for all except to pull number 8, please.
All right. Now I'd like to pull number 9. Anybody else? All right. Can we get a motion to approve all but 8 and 9? So moved. All right. Motion by Dr. Trampy to approve all but 8 and 9 in the consent agenda. Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
And chair's aye. And Mr. Skinner, I'd like to go, if you don't mind
Please
me
go
going
ahead.
first. Gail, Ms. Perkins, I'm sorry. If you can come on up to the podium, I'd appreciate it. You and your husband can accompany you there. A little support. I feel privileged. I don't know if you remember me, but I've certainly had some contact with you over the years, and feel very privileged to be able to read this proclamation for you. Very well deserved. You've certainly put in many years for us, and I'll get started with no more further delay. This is a commendation recognizing Gail Perkins upon her retirement. Whereas Gail Perkins, registered nurse at Mary Washington Hospital, retired September 1st, 2018, making almost 3 decades of significant contributions to the health and safety of women and children in Spotsylvania County and surrounding communities. And whereas Ms. Perkins was a nurse at Mary Washington Hospital in Fredericksburg for 29 years, 18 of which she served as a forensic examiner. And whereas Ms. Perkins performed almost 1,000 forensic exams on patients who were sexually assaulted, physically abused, or neglected. And whereas Ms. Perkins co-founded the groundbreaking sexual assault nurse examiner program known as SANE at Mary Washington Hospital in March of 2000. And whereas Ms. Perkins further expanded the SANE program into forensic nursing, serving as the director of the Forensic Services Department at Mary Washington Hospital. And whereas Ms. Perkins was key in the development of the Safe Harbor Advocacy Center in Spotsylvania, where abused children have been interviewed, undergone forensic exams, and received counseling services in a child-friendly facility since 2008. And whereas Ms. Perkins is the recipient of numerous awards, including the 2012 National Spirit of Women Healthcare Hero, in which she received national recognition for her advocacy of women and children victimized by sexual violence. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors, this 25th day of September 2018, publicly recognizes Gail Perkins and extends on behalf of its members and the residents of Spotsylvania appreciation for her service to the county and congratulations upon her retirement. Congratulations, job well done.
Thank you.
I'm going to hand you this resolution here, or commendation here in just a second. Mr.
Chairman.
Byrd,
Yes,
please.
sir, if I may. Obviously, Ms. Perkins, I'm Travis Byrd, Commonwealth Attorney of Spotsylvania County. I was at our event this weekend. To show you kind of person Ms. Perkins is, she came out and collected items for Hurricane Florence when we were out Sunday collecting. We loaded up an 18-wheeler. But there was a local business owner there who I mentioned that you had just retired, and he was familiar with your work and what you did at Safe Harbor creating that facility. And he wanted to do something upon your retirement, so Ashley Furniture and Trivets Furniture wanted me to present you with a $1,000 gift certificate.
Ooh, wow. Congratulations. I'll tell you what, why don't you and your husband come up front and grab a quick picture? Oh, can we get a
motion to approve?
Motion approved by Mr. Ross. Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Dr. Trampy.
Aye.
And chair's aye. I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry, Ms. Bergen. Why don't you come up with your husband and at least get a picture with this thing first, and then we can all surround you. And yeah, you can come right here. I'll move out of the way. We can start moving down, and Michelle can get you and your husband there. Mr. Skinner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The reason I pulled number 8 is I've had a few calls from our senior citizens that are retired and are on Medicare, and they've always, they like the word grandfathered. And it's not appropriate in this case, and rather than me explaining this, I would like Miss Mann, if she could come up and, is she here?
Ms. Mann.
Ms. Moore?
Or- That will be fine, thank you. The word grandfather has a long history, one that we don't have enough time to go through tonight. But a short question, why we put election vice, I believe, grandfather in
Yes,
there.
sir. Basically, in the insurance world, the word election is more appropriate because you're electing to choose this over that. And not to get into too much complicated explanation, but what was voted on, and I rewatched the tapes to make sure that I was understanding, this gives all of the members of those groups, as far as the retirees, the choice to choose to stay with the current plan or to go into the HRA. If they're over the age of 65, of course, they'd have to be medically eligible to go into the HRA plan. But using the word election is really the appropriate thing in the insurance scheme to make that happen. So grandfathering wouldn't necessarily be the appropriate term. It just doesn't have the legal ramifications that we want to have in this, and we wanted to be able to give them the choice, and that was what was voted on. That was my understanding of what was voted on. So this is the most appropriate term to use.
I appreciate that, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve item 8.
All right, motion by Mr. Skinner to approve item 8. Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
And Chair is aye.
Excellent. Mr. Chairman, that brings us to board reports.
Mr. Yakubowski, you got anything?
Yes, thank you. This evening, I really wasn't going to say anything, but it was stated in the meeting here by some individuals about a situation that's been going on in the county and been presented to the board over the past several months. And I would be remiss if I didn't address it. I've stated since the beginning that the county should not be getting involved in other agency actions. The Department of Social Services is a state agency. It might be located in Spotsylvania County, but it is a state agency, such as the Department of Motor Vehicles is a state agency, and the Social Security Administration in Cosner's Corner is a federal agency. The geographical location of it does not necessarily mean that this board has any oversight of those departments. When this first began and the issue was brought before us, this board decided to send a letter to the state director to investigate this issue. I voted no, and I continue to believe that my vote was the correct one because it did not lead to a good location where we find ourselves. So I do have a couple of questions I'm going to ask the county attorney, even though Mr. Taylor did read a statement a few months ago detailing exactly what the county can and cannot do, what oversight we do and do not have, and what positions and roles that we can and cannot play. But it seems to be ignored by some, and I think that it is very important that people understand exactly what this board's role is and what it isn't. So, Mr. County Attorney, if we were to pass a motion today and demand to see all the documents from any case, both sides, could we?
Supervisor Yakubowski, respectfully, with respect to legal advice on matters such as these, I respectfully would decline to comment unless there is a vote of a majority of the board to actually provide that advice. My recommendation would be to continue, as I have been, to provide legal advice in closed session on this matter, respectfully.
Okay, well, I'm not asking a specific one. I'm asking in general. Are we allowed to see both sides, or are there state laws that shield certain information from getting out?
Again, respectfully,
okay, well,
Supervisor Yakubowski, I would make that recommendation again with a vote of the board to approve The waiver of that, the previous advice that I've given and that continued advice, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
With all due respect.
No, and I certainly understand that, and I understand that you're being put on the spot, and it's not my intention to do that. My intention is to get the information out there, so I will say that it is my understanding that there are many sides to the story, and we are not allowed to see by law certain parts of it. Just as was stated here by a gentleman, that this board needs to make a motion to reunify a situation that's going on currently. It is my understanding and opinion that we cannot do that. We have absolutely no role in that situation, nor can we affect or direct the current procedure that is going on. But there is one vote that this board does have, because Mr. Taylor does sit as our local social services board. It sounds kind of weird, but he is the board. And that is to fire the social services director, or social services director, I'm sorry. And I would say that, and it has been stated here, and it is public knowledge of what has been going on, and I find it atrocious, that there have been 4 board members that have directed the county administrator to take such actions. I would ask for this to immediately stop, for us to remove ourselves from matters that we do not have a role in, and that we stop this procedure and these actions against the head of the Social Services Department. Thank you.
Nothing to report.
Mr. Ross?
I would just like to thank VDOT for the Route 3 I-95 interchange. That's gone live, and it so far so good. It's working out very well. That's all I've got.
Mr. Skinner? Mr. Marshall?
Just one quick thing. I was informed by VDOT that the railroad crossing on Summit Crossing Road will be shut down October 15th for approximately about 5 days to do some repairs. CSX will be making those repairs. We've had some issues there. There'll be detours posted. VDOT's going to be putting it on their website. I just want to let the public be aware of it. Thank you. That's it.
Dr. Trammey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have several items. I like the changes to the Route 3 intersection as well. At this moment, I'm not in a mood to be thanking VDOT, but that's in my previous time as vice chair, when I was subbing for Mr. McLaughlin, I found out how difficult it is to be quick enough with the gavel when something occurs on the floor. So I understand, Mr. Chairman, but Mr. Taylor reads off the rules before every public comment period, and personal attacks are not allowed, and I believe the word kidnapping to describe county employees engaging in their legal, lawful responsibilities is completely inappropriate. My next item, I'll get to the 2 things I actually had prepared before I came here. At the regional meeting for Region 7 and 8 of VACO, there were a couple of state legislators there, and when the new proffer law came to discussion, they suggested that whenever someone suggests some other solution, the legislators who first put through the proffer law mentioned that they made available to local jurisdictions, now I'm forgetting the words, transportation, what is it? Impact fees. They made transportation impact fees available to us, and only 2 jurisdictions have taken them up for it, so they they say we're not serious about wanting to do something or finding a solution to this. So I've brought up transportation fees before. I believe Mr. McLaughlin has. I'd like to see staff develop a presentation for us, both the pros and the cons. If there are pitfalls, I want to know about it. But when I brought this up before, it was mentioned that, well, Stafford tried that, and they're one of the 2 counties who tried it. When Stafford tried it, they had a bad experience, or however that's phrased. But the folks from Stafford who were in attendance at the regional meeting didn't feel that way. They didn't feel that it was a mistake. So I'd like for staff to prepare something, and let's move forward at least considering that. My last item, and I apologize that I have to be somewhat cryptic due to confidentiality rules, but I wanted to commend the county administrator for his work over the last 2 weeks. He is tasked with both the responsibility of being fair to all the employees and also following what a majority of this board wants him to do. And unfortunately, sometimes those 2 tasks are in conflict. I know he's been working very hard to make it work out both ways. And I just want to commend him for his work over the last couple of weeks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'll just say, I think it was brought up tonight that we didn't act on a motion. If I recall, Mr. Ross, I think you withdrew it. So, well, sometimes it's just best to be quiet. So I don't have any more report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That brings us to public hearings. This evening we have CA 18-0005, subdivision ordinance amendments related to the Chesapeake Bay Act. Good evening, Leon. How are you, sir?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. As County Administrator stated, the county is undergoing a compliance review for the, excuse me, the Chesapeake Bay Act, and some required changes are needed to the subdivision ordinance have been identified. The ordinance amendments address those items. The amendments are to the preliminary plat and record plat sections of the ordinance. 2 notes are being added to the plats, the first is related to resource protection areas to let future property owners know that what the restrictions are on development in the RPA. The second note is to alert property owners that sewage treatment systems or septic systems are required to be pumped out every 5 years. Other changes are to the plat checklist to ensure identification of both the primary and 100 reserve drain fill areas when lots are not served by public water and sewer. All of these changes to the subdivision ordinance are already requirements found in the county's Chesapeake Bay ordinance. The Planning Commission voted on September 5th to recommend approval 7-0, and staff recommends approval of the ordinance 20-46. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions from the board? All right. We'll open up the public hearing for subdivision ordinance amendment related to the Chesapeake Bay Act. Amy, do we have any speakers?
No, sir.
All right. Is there anybody that did not sign up that wishes to speak now in reference to this public hearing, subdivision ordinance amendment related to the Chesapeake Bay Act? You may come forward. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. A motion to approve this?
Motion to approve.
Motion approved by Mr. Skinner. Mr. Skinner, I'll start down your way. Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Chair, aye.
Next, Mr. Chairman, board members, is R18-0002, Keswick Land Development Corporation, Keswick Senior Apartments LLC, and Keswick Apartments 1 LLC R18-0002 in the Berkeley District.
Floor is yours, Kimberly.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Floor computer, please. This is a request to amend the proffers approved with the Keswick rezoning. Keswick was approved in 2011 and rezoned approximately 58 acres from Agriculture 2 to Planned Development Housing District 5 to allow for a total of 764 units. Of that, there were 240 multifamily units, 90 single-family attached units, 84 age-restricted attached, 150 single-family detached, 100 age-restricted multifamily units, and an assisted living facility with 100 residents. There's also a 36-acre public park. The amendments to the proffers requested by the applicant include the elimination of the proffered Keswick architectural guidelines, a change in the timing of delivery of the park facilities, a change in the number and type of recreational facilities fields to be provided in the park, and other typographical and clarification changes. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on September 5th and voted 6-1 to recommend approval of the proffer amendment as proposed. Since the Planning Commission meeting, the applicants have submitted revised proffers dated September 10th, 2018, included in your packet, which address staff's concerns related to a delayed delivery of the park. Staff is recommending denial of the proffer amendment as proposed based on the elimination of the commitment to the Keswick architectural guidelines. However, staff has no objection to the remainder of the proffer amendment, which includes typographical edits, clarifying language, the changes to the recreational facilities, and the timing of the delivery of the park. Here's an aerial map just to reorient you with the Keswick location. The site lies east of Lake Anno Parkway, just south of the Courthouse Village development. The property has frontage on Old Robert E. Lee Drive, which will be the point of access for the development. The site is currently under construction, including the infrastructure for the development, the age-restricted apartments, and the non-age-restricted apartments. I'll go through each proffer, which they're requesting an amendment. The first is what the approved proffer is to commit to develop the Keswick development in conformance with the architectural guidelines, and that any amendment to the architectural guidelines must be approved by the county. The guidelines included architectural features and design, porch styles, garage orientation, building materials, fencing, and landscaping. A quote out of the architectural guidelines document stated that the architectural guidelines serve as a tool to ensure that the initial vision for Keswick is preserved. Keswick rezoning was presented to the public and the county and approved with a defined commitment to how the development would look once constructed. The deletion of the proffer eliminates the requirement for the design of the community to be constructed as originally approved. The Keswick development has restrictive covenants, which currently include the establishment of an architectural review board and the architectural guidelines. But with the elimination of this proffer, there is nothing to prohibit the developer from changing the guidelines or eliminating them completely. Staff understands the need to respond to market changes, which is what the applicant has explained is driving this proffer amendment. And the applicant has discussed changes that are needed to the architectural guidelines with staff, and staff has no concerns with those. Some examples that were given was building materials, using a board and batten design rather than just a clapboard style architectural design, reducing the requirement for an 8-foot width porch down to a 6-foot width porch. All of those changes that were presented, staff has no concern with those, and so that's why staff is recommending that rather than eliminate those guidelines completely and the commitment that was made with the original rezoning, that the applicant revise the guidelines with the changes that they know are needed to be flexible with the market, and amend those with this proffer amendment before you, and keep the commitment to the guidelines in place. The second proffer amendment, the original proffer was a commitment to provide a public park with 3 soccer fields and goals complete Phase 1 of the park prior to the issuance of the 260th building permit, and Phase 2 prior to the issuance of the 400th building permit. Phase 1 includes the park entrance, the parking lot, restrooms, a maintenance building, and 1 soccer field. The Phase 2 included 2 soccer fields, 2 tennis courts, a picnic pavilion, 2 horseshoe pits, a tot lot, nature trail, irrigation for the park, and stormwater facilities. The requested amendment is to replace 2 of the soccer fields with 2 Little League baseball diamonds and deliver both Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the park prior to the issuance of the 260th residential occupancy permit. This would put delivery of the entire park at approximately 77% build out of the Keswick development. Staff is supportive of the change in the fields as this is meeting the need of the county as identified by Parks and Recreation Department, and staff is also supportive of the delivery of the park, Phase 1 and Phase 2. Third, the approved proffer requires that the applicant shall provide irrigation facilities for the park, and the irrigation will be provided by stormwater management ponds. The requested amendment is to delete the language which states the stormwater ponds will be the source of irrigation. The Keswick rezoning was approved before a code requirement which states if there is public water available that the irrigation must be provided by the public water source. There is going to be a public water source, and so to make these proffers consistent with current code requirements is what's driving the proffer amendment here to delete that language. So staff is supportive of this amendment as well. Other requested changes include updating the properties with new ownership and tax map numbers. The property has since been subdivided and some portions of it sold to developers, the apartment developers. Other language changes are the addition of clarifying language which specify the type of unit of housing unit referenced for each land bay. This does not increase or change the number of units permitted with this development. It is simply to clarify the unit type. And also an amendment to the timing of delivery for the trail along Old Robert E. Lee Drive from the 320th building permit to the 320th occupancy permit. And staff has no concerns with this amendment either, as it's just the difference between the construction period from building permit to occupancy permit. So staff is supportive of all of these amendments as proposed. Findings in favor: the proposed revisions to the park facilities address the current needs of the county as identified by the Parks and Recreation Department, and the amended proffer statement provides greater clarity and specificity. Finding against is that the deletion of the proffered Keswick architectural guidelines eliminates the requirement to construct Keswick as presented and as approved with the original rezoning. As I mentioned, the Planning Commission is recommending approval. Staff is recommending denial as proposed, but approval with the revision of the architectural guidelines to include the changes identified by the applicant, but maintaining the commitment to the guidelines. And that is the conclusion of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the board? Mr. Skinner?
One question. When we go back to, I think it's slide number 7, it says that the applicant shall provide irrigation facilities for the park, and the irrigation will be provided by the stormwater management ponds. And then down here, recommended staff is supportive of amendment as the county code requires irrigation facilities to be served by public water. The question is, at Patriot Park, we take our irrigation from the pond that we collect the water in. Is that not true?
I can't speak to Patriot Park, but how it was explained to me is that the code had changed since Keswick was approved even.
I guess what I'm asking is, and again, I'm not sure what our document says, but irrigation, and we have actual ponds that we collect, and that's what it's used for, rather than coming off of water, public water that's been purified and everything of that nature. So it's great. So I'm just confused on why it has to be public water as irrigations.
This was a comment from the utilities. I'm sorry.
Mr. Skinner, you are correct. The Patriot Park does use a combination of stormwater for the irrigation purposes and uses the public water supply for the bathrooms and things like that. The Keswick proffers, when they were processed, the interpretation of the code at that time was that there was allowance to use stormwater and public water. However, after discussions with the VDH and interpretations by the county attorney's office, basically we came to the determination that if public water was available, you had to connect all uses of water on the property for that use. That said, we are working with FABA and VDH evaluating ways to strengthen the code to allow that to come back into use in the county. We anticipate that sometime probably this winter coming in for a code revision.
So simply said, we're following a state code, state law?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Well, Kimberly, as far as staff, you're just recommending that they come out with specifics that they want changed, correct?
Right, we're recommending that they not eliminate that commitment to the architectural guidelines completely. And since they know what the changes are that they need to go ahead and make those amendments and keep the commitment in place.
Okay, thank you. Does Mr.
The applicant is here.
I was about to say, does Mr. Gerald want to come forward and present?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'm Jay Jarrell. I'm president of Keswick Land Development Corporation, the applicant in this case. And I totally understand Kimberly's position on this. The problem that I have is that I first talked to each of you in December of last year about amending our architectural guidelines. The architectural guidelines are antiquated. We've had two different national builders tell us they need to be changed. I started by going to Troy Tigner. Troy, how do I change the architectural guidelines? You've got to do a proffer amendment. We started talking to staff about a proffer amendment. It turns out that a proffer amendment is not a simple endeavor. The entire proffers, as you've noticed, if there's a code change, everything in the proffers is brought up for review. It was basically like we're starting all over again. What I'm asking tonight is, sure, as a fallback position, I would go with the changes that staff and I have agreed on, if that's what we need to do. But what I'm asking you for is to treat me like every other development in this county. Other than Nye River Village, there is no other development that has to come before the board to get their architectural guidelines amended. I have architectural guidelines in place. They will remain in place. Yes, they will be changed from time to time. But even if we didn't have this proffer, I would still have architectural guidelines. I have to. Nobody would buy houses there if I didn't. So that's what I'm asking, is that next week, my next builder says, well, I really want to use this material. I'm going to have to start all over again and do this whole procedure. So that's all I'm really asking, is that I be treated like everyone else. We'll have architectural guidelines, but if we need to change them, we'll change them according to our declaration and according to the HOA rules. Thank you very much.
Any questions from the board? Mr. McLaughlin.
A couple quick ones for you. What, now you said you've already had agreement with county staff about what potential changes, what are they? What were the?
Oh boy, there are 8 of them. Let's see if I can remember. One was a type of siding material. A new siding material is, they call it board and batten. It's a vinyl material with the stripes going up and down, and that's a new material that people use. Another one was the depth of porches. At that time, 8-foot deep porches were the in thing, and one of my partners suggested those. Not nobody, but fewer people do those these days, so we've asked to reduce that to 5 foot in depth. Another thing was every yard was to have a fence in the front yard. No exceptions. You had to, whether you wanted to or not. Again, that was a thing that was in vogue back in 2011. Traditional neighborhood developments. Not really appropriate for that kind of subdivision at this time. Another thing was, actually there was a inconsistency in the guidelines. It talked about if you had, that your shutters had to match the size of your window opening. And which would infer that if you had a double-sized window, you'd have double-sized shutters, but there were pictures of single-sized shutters. So we clarified that. There was language that implied that every house had to have a side-load garage. Well, that certainly wasn't the intent, so we were trying to clarify. I have a feeling Kimberly, did I forget one? Vinyl in the soffits, you could have material that was different than the siding itself, and for whatever reason, even though you could have vinyl siding, we didn't list vinyl shakes up in the soffits, not in the soffits, in the eaves, and that was the last change. And we agreed. Mr. Tigner found them acceptable. Planning staff found them to be acceptable. Our disagreement tonight is I would like to not have to do this and come back before you if there's another change in the future.
So I guess this is really for the, Kimberly, Mr. Gerald stated that other developers don't have this restriction. Is that the case? Do we put this restriction on others, or do we hold them that tight in development?
Well, there have been many other projects that have proffered architectural elevations and designs, but he's correct that Keswick and Nye Village are the only two that had this design guideline booklet.
Okay. Other than that, those are the only two that we've placed those restrictions. I mean, it was their proffer, but I mean, at this point, we're kind of holding them to a special standard at this. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? That's what I want to add. So you proffered these architectural renderings.
I have to say, yes, I certainly did. As an explanation, it was 2 o'clock on the day of the board meeting when I was supposed to be approved, and I got a call from the then county attorney that said, if you want to have language in the proffers, in the proffers about architectural guidelines, you must make them amendable only by coming to the board. And I had about 20 minutes to make a decision about that, and I agreed to that. I didn't realize that I was the only one who would be stuck with those rules. But yes, I did agree to them. It felt a little bit under duress, but it certainly was my choice to go along with it. I didn't realize what a hassle it would be to change them in the future.
Okay. Kimberly, would your staff be, or maybe Carl, I ought to look at you too, if he's amenable to agreeing to those changes that planning staff if he's specific about it, are we able to accept that? I mean, you know what I'm saying?
If this is the little dance that kind of goes through, the board can't, require or recommend proffers. They can state its concerns. So if at some point enough of the board members state concerns with getting rid of the architectural guidelines, Mr. Gerald can then, proffer those changes, and what that would trigger is it would be continued to the next meeting while we review those, take a look at them, just like any amendment that comes up here before the board. It doesn't matter, if we've discussed it previously. It's something that's we put in place because of the new proffer laws, the new proffer regulations. So if he does make that amendment tonight, that'll continue it out, and the board can consider it at its next meeting.
So we can't. Planning is familiar with what changes he wants, specific changes.
That's correct. And
can't just make it part of that?
And there's been some discussions with us too, but with respect to the code requirement, it doesn't treat anything differently, and that's on purpose. And we would recommend, and we would say that it's required legally to continue it out. We don't want to allow that to not be the case, because we don't want any decision by the board to be undercut by some procedural argument. So if he does end up proffering that, it would trigger the continuance, but the board, if it's happy at its next meeting, could go ahead and vote and accept it. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense.
I think so.
Chairman Benton, if I may, I think there may be a little confusion here. What Mr. Gerald is asking for is the removal of these architectural guidelines. He doesn't want to come before the Board of Supervisors every time the builder wants to change the type of vinyl siding and have to go back through this proffer amendment again. It's not a, it's not a deal where we're going to be picking out what kind of vinyl siding we're going to allow in this subdivision. It's not what he's asking.
Okay. Well, I'll just say, Mr. Gerald, I'll admit, I met with you and we went
Yes,
over specific things you wanted changed.
Correct.
And I was amenable, I mean, I think to everything you said.
I believe so, yes.
Which you basically listed here. But I'm cautious about just doing a broad brush and saying you can change whatever you want anytime you want. And just, I mean, that really could, I mean, and that's, I think, what I've gotten a few emails on it, not many.
Sure.
I think maybe 3, if I'm counting right, or if I remember right. But and that was one of the concerns. I mean, that you could change whatever you wanted,
Sure.
and totally change the dynamics, basically, of what that community is supposed to be, if you understand. So, Mr. Yakubowski.
Thank you. If I understand it, and I'd like to clarify a little bit better, what you're basically saying is that in the proffers, the county had, and you had agreed to certain restrictions, architectural guidelines, and those being 7 years ago, taste and desires that people have for what their houses will look like have changed. And so to change any of that, since it was a proffer, you had to come back to the board. Once you open the proffers, any other changes in county code then have to be changed because the proffers then are brand new. Think of it kind of that
Correct.
way.
Yes.
And so to avoid that and to have our staff deal with other things and not have to deal every time that there's a new type of siding or people don't like a porch depth that way anymore, or perhaps even the white picket fence type designs will go away for something else that comes in vogue 10 years from now, because developments, as we just heard from Fawn Lake, they still have 150-something lots, and that was approved 25 years ago or so. This way, it takes it out of the county constantly having to deal with you, I mean that in a nice way, and allows you to deal with the market forces as they come, which does not mean that you will then degrade your development, because the whole point to it is to make it profitable and even more profitable. And by doing that, you respond to what the market wants, and you want to be able to do that in a timely manner.
Exactly. And if I could just expand a little on the use of your staff's time, picture this, 10 years from now, I'm long gone, I'm no longer involved. You still have this requirement, and there's some new, let's just say, satellite dish, 5-foot satellite dish that people want to install in their front yards. And 50.1% of the residents want it, and 49.9% don't. Where do they have to come to change their covenants? They have to come in front of you, and you're now involved with that dispute that really you need to decide if that's something that you're interested in spending your time on.
Any other comments from the board? All right.
Thank you very much.
We're going to open up the public hearing for Keswick Land Development Corporation, Keswick Senior Apartments LLC, and Keswick Apartments 1 LLC. This is Berkeley District. And I think we did have somebody signed up.
Francesca Taylor, followed by Rose Davis.
Okay.
Francesca Taylor, Livingston District. Spotsylvania County says the architectural guidelines serve as a tool to ensure that the initial vision for Keswick is preserved. Mr. Jarrell wants to be totally relieved from complying with the architectural guidelines, but they were a big factor in changing his residential entitlement from 10 units to 764 units. In rezoning cases, this board consistently expects developers to show our community what they are going to build and to proffer the plans and designs necessary to build what they show us. The Palmer's Creek proposal for 400 additional units is the most recent example of this. It's what this board always does. It's what our community expects, and it's the right thing to do, especially when so many dwelling units are added. The problem isn't that Mr. Jarrell wants to be excused from building to the 7-year-old standards. The problem is that he doesn't want to be bound by any architectural standards at all. That's not what this board does in rezonings that add hundreds of dwelling units. This board and our whole community reasonably expects developers to show us up front what they will commit to build. Why should any less be expected of Mr. Gerald? He should be treated like everyone else. That's what he asked the Planning Commission to do. So where are his plans and elevations and design covenants that he will proffer for Keswick? All of those elements typically go along with a major new development in our county. We do want him to be treated like everyone else and not special. We want him to show us and commit to what he will build in exchange for the huge increase in zoning entitlement that he got. Mr. Ross said of Jackson Village at the board meeting on September 11th, they made promises and they should be expected to keep those promises. Mr. Gerald should be treated the same. This project includes subsidized housing. Architectural standards are particularly important in subsidized communities. We all tend to take things for granted when we get them cheap. Positive standards produce better neighborhoods. This is how the city of New York conquered litter. They set a high standard of clean, and then they maintained it until their citizens embraced it. The Planning Commission got distracted with concerns about slowing Keswick down. Mr. Gerald knows our community always wants to see what new developments will look like, and we always expect the developers to commit to build what he shows us in exchange for extra dwelling units. Please table this application and ask Mr. Gerald to come back with the elevations and architectural standards that he will proffer.
Ma'am, your time is up.
Rose Davis, followed by Michael Berry.
Good evening. I'm Rose Davis. I live in, I'm in the Livingston District. I also live in Spotsylvania subdivision, which is less than 3,000 feet from this development. And this application is all about what Mr. Gerald doesn't want to do. Where are the specifics showing what Mr. Gerald will do in Keswick? Mr. Gerald is not building all these houses himself. Keswick's residential units are a commodity. Without architectural covenants, these are just residential entitlements to be sold to builders who have no obligation to our community to build to any design or quality standard beyond the building code. Their greatest priority is maximum profit, and maximum profit does not always yield a quality product. This is a basic integrity issue. Our community was promised that Keswick would be built to the proffered architectural standards. In exchange for that and other promises, the developer gained the right to sell 754 more residential units than the 10 that were previously allowed by right. How many development units is he willing to give up in exchange for relief from the standards? By right, development of the Keswick property could have been done without architectural standards. Why not roll back to that lot yield if you are going to allow him to break his promise? This is not a property rights issue. As one of the planning commissioners wisely stated a while back, when the land goes from an individual homeowner to a development company, it is no longer private property, it is a commodity. I am hoping that you would treat Keswick as such and hold the developer to his promise, or at least to some architectural standards that we can all see, that they're written down. It is not this board's job to ensure maximum profitability for the developer. It's your job to protect the residents of the county and the people who are living close to the development. I would hope that Mr. Gerald would also deliver the park in the middle of the project. That would, if he doesn't, that will set the community up for a push later from new Keswick residents, saying that they bought unaware of the park and they don't want outsiders in their neighborhood using their park. That's exactly what happened to some of the proffered improvements at Fox Point. We should get the park up front and put a big sign on it so that everyone knows it's there. That way we won't lose it. Through the Keswick rezoning, the citizens receive the benefits of the developer's proffered commitments in exchange for a huge increase in the yield from 10 units to 764 units.
Ma'am, I'm sorry, but your time is up.
Michael Berry, followed by Raymond Tate. Raymond Tate.
My name is Raymond Tate. I live on Robert E. Lee Drive, old Robert E. Lee Drive over here across the street. The Keswick, I'm praying to God that you make them stick to the original agreement back in 2011. They have done nothing but abuse 11 senior citizens on Robert E. Lee Drive. They continue doing so. I sit in my front yard and I watch the poor 72-year-old lady across the street sitting in a chair in her front yard making them get off her property because they don't have easement across it. But they wanted to sneak in a water main down there, an oversized water main. They snuck in the water main. They went to VDOT. I guess they climbed in bed with VDOT. VDOT let them use their permit, their easement, which I don't even think is legal, to put the water main in. Now they come over there and both neighbors across the street from me, luckily I'm on the other side of the street, but when I called Joel up the last hearing we had, I couldn't sit in my front yard no more. There's so much dust, dirt floating down the street. So one of you all called them, I guess, to straighten it out. They got a water truck down there. It sat right out in the front of the project the whole time. It never came down Robert Lee Drive one time, but it made, I guess, the supervisors happy because Keswick called and said we have one. But they've snuck past everything. 7 years ago, we were told the place went bankrupt, so we let it lay. They need to stick to their original agreement back in 2011 because they let it lay. We didn't. They did. We were told they went bankrupt. We fought it up to we were supposed to be getting to court. The entrance wasn't supposed to be on Robert Lee Drive. Robert Lee Drive has, I think, 11 people. I believe 10 of them are senior citizens. Half of them came last time, but they're afraid to speak. And I'm just asking you to make them, don't give them free run of nothing. I mean, they, just 2 weeks ago, they ran into my ditch in my driveway and hit my culvert. Did they do anything? My daughter called them up. I haven't been able to. I just got out of an 8-hour surgery. And, I mean, they're nice, I mean, but, you know, here it goes again. They do what they want, when they want, and how they drive 80-ton excavators, track excavators, up and down Robert Lee Drive, clearly against the law. Law clearly says no track excavators can be on the street without putting boards down and planking in. They do it clearly. I complain to VDOT, I complain to everybody else. My road is junk. I mean, I got a motorcycle and hopefully I can get better one day to ride it again, and hopefully that you know, the road will be better, but that's all I have to say, and I just hope you make them stick to that 2011. Don't give them free reins. They already have free reins of everything. I mean, if you want to come over and sit on my front porch with me and watch it. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
There are no other citizens signed up to speak.
Is there anybody that did not sign up that wishes to speak in reference to this public hearing? Keswick Land Development Corporation, Keswick Senior Apartments. Whoops. You may come forward.
Janet Asper, Livingston District. I live in the Spotsylvania subdivision, which is right next to Keswick. I actually have 2 questions to ask regarding the changes. The first is whether or not the area of the park in this change from the soccer fields to the Little League diamonds, is that an even swap? Is the square acreage that is being given up and not building the soccer field, is that being equated by those diamonds? That's my first question. My second question regards changing the timeline for the trail, changing it from the 320th building permit to the 320th occupancy permit. I'm not familiar with this procedure, and I wondered what does that do to that timeline for that trail, considering the Spotsylvania subdivision and the New Keswick property are very landlocked in not having any sidewalks that actually let the children get anywhere. To go across the street to Robert E. Lee School is pretty treacherous. I was wondering what kind of timeline change that would be for us getting those trails on that property. Thank you very much.
Is there anybody else that did not sign up that wishes to speak at this time in reference to this public hearing? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. I believe the applicant has some time to speak if he wishes to speak again. Okay. Kimberly, can you answer any of those last two questions? In reference to the diamonds, we're still going to have the same area for the park?
It's the same area. It's just the greater need, the deficiency that we have are the Little League baseball diamonds instead of the soccer fields.
Okay.
And then with respect to the timing of the trail, the approved proffers had the trail being installed prior to issuance of the 320th building permit. And then the amendment is to be at the 320th occupancy permit. So that's from building to occupancy. That that could be a 6 to 8 month process difference.
Okay. So could it substantially delay the trail, you think, or just by the?
Not in staff's opinion, no, sir.
Okay. Any other comments from the board?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
One question I think Mr. McLaughlin, you asked about, do we have other cases with the design guidelines? And one other example is, it was called Retreat at Chancellorsville North. And they have proffered that they will have design guidelines, but rather than the specific design guideline booklet, they say this development will have architectural guidelines, and the guidelines will consist of, and it names, 3 or 4 components to it, so that, the guidelines can change as long as they maintain those, 3 or 4 components. And so that was another example I wanted to share with you.
I'll just make a quick comment. I mean, Mr. Darrell, we had a good meeting, and like I say, I agree with all his changes that he would like, but I just can't open it up to free reign. I just can't do that. We're told that would totally change, would give him the opportunity to totally change everything about it. And I'd like to see the specifics in there and then go from there.
And Mr. Benton, just to comment on what you just said, so from now on, would you like to do that with all the developments we have in Spotsylvania County?
Well,
We're going to tell them how to build the homes?
Well, I'll just comment. He's the one that proffered it. He's the one that put up the agreement to the county saying, this is what I'm going to do. Yeah, times change, construction changes, but he is the one that proffered this information. The county didn't make him proffer that. Just like what Kimberly said about some of these others. They proffer a kind of a generalized construction. They don't be as specific as Mr. Darrell has, but he was very specific as far as what he's going to build and how it was going to be built. I agree with his changes that he wants. I have no issue with that. But to give it carte blanche where he can literally change the entire landscape and what this board at one point, I was involved in it, but he could change the entire picture that he has provided the board at that time. That's the I mean, I don't have any problems with the changes that he wants. But just to open it up and say, here now on, he can do whatever he wants, any kind of materials, any kind of design, any kind of anything, blah. I mean, I can't support that.
And Kimberly, correct, if we were to approve this and remove the architectural guideline, it's not going to change the type of buildings that are going in there, correct? It's just not. Only thing it changes is you can make a porch. If you wanted to have a porch that was 8 foot deep, or if you wanted to have a porch that was 10 foot deep, you could have either one, correct?
Well, with this amendment, eliminating the proffer eliminates the county's enforcement that there be this architectural guideline. Right. So Mr. Gerald says that he will keep architectural guidelines, but the county cannot enforce that.
And everything would still be held to state building code. There's nothing going to be changed with that. You
Certainly
couldn't go
building
above
code,
and
yes,
beyond state building code.
Exactly.
Right, okay, thank you.
I think what Mr. Marshall's asking is, it's still going to be a certain type of building, whether it's multifamily or single-family standalone. It just changes the look of the building, or it would allow the change of the look of the building. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, that's exactly.
Well, and just to be clear, Kimberly, if I may, Mr. Chairman, without any guideline or general design proffer, then there wouldn't necessarily need to be any porches at all, would there?
That's right.
Go ahead.
And just for clarification, Mr. Gerald just wants the ability to make the changes without having to come back to the board. So, you know, like Kimberly said, we think we could probably come up with some language that might accomplish both goals. So his whole goal is just to be able to make adjustments as the market dictates without having to come back to have the Board of Supervisors approve that change.
So you think you can come up with the language to, well, y'all can come up with the language to maybe accommodate both?
We can certainly work on that.
Mr.
Chair, I guess the question is, and I think where you're going at, somebody, zoning administrator or somebody else would make this approval based on a request for the change? Or who would make that, other than coming to the board? He should be able to go to the county staff and say, we want to change this siding to this siding, and if the county staff concurs, he makes the change without coming for a proffer amendment. So can you put that in, if we approve on the next meeting, the changes that you're requested today, can you put that language as part of that proffer agreement? To where it doesn't come to us?
We could probably find some language that has been used before that would do that. I think so, yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Skinner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the problems I see that we have is, and I'm not completely sure that these are the only two cases where they were submitted, but we have applications out there that are over 10 years old and haven't been built on yet. And our problem is that, you know, what we're saying is the developer is driven by the market. What homes, we've seen apartments, we've seen single dwellings and stuff of that nature. And after 10 years or even 7 years, there's going to be a change in technology as far as what lasts longer and stuff of that nature. And, you know, I think we have to be reasonable and be able to, the developer come back and say, in 2011, this is exactly what the technology we built, the design we built. And I just would like to see, because I don't understand, a new developer comes in, is he going to give you, he's going to tell you what he's going to build at that time, right? And that's a requirement. Or is it a requirement? It's not, okay? So we don't have any control over it to begin with. Now somebody comes up here and truthfully said, look, this is what's going to go in there because it's going to work, the market driven, and finds out we have an economy that goes down and people aren't buying homes. I just think we need to be consistent, whether it's 10, 15 years down the road. And, you know, I don't believe any developer is going to put up something that's not going to sell. It's going to be a waste of time. And I would think that we have some really good developers around here, and I don't think the concern is to keep Spotsylvania County in good standing as far as designs and stuff of that nature. So I think we need to relook this and figure out how we can do it. Maybe, you know, in the future we can talk about, you know, if you don't build within 5 years, it goes back to the other zoning. I mean, there's a lot of things we could talk about because we have a lot of people out there that could start building tomorrow. And the fact that we allow somebody not to put in standards and we've now forced because of the time period, I think we have to be flexible enough to look and see what we can do to adjust times too. So I agree. I'd like to see some language that would qualify anybody in this position. Okay, I think it can be done too. Thank you.
Mr. Yakubeski.
Thank you. A couple points. One, the soccer fields are being removed, but aren't we building a new soccer field behind Spotsylvania Middle? So there is, I don't want soccer parents to call and ask why there's no soccer fields.
And it's only there's going to still be one soccer field.
Right. Okay. So there were supposed to be two. There will be one, and we're making up for it just right down the road. So no phone calls, please. Number two, it's Mr. Benton's district anyway, so call him.
Thank you.
But the other point I want to make is that I'm not sold on the zoning administrator being in charge, because what if the zoning administrator says no? I mean, what recourse does the developer then have to say, I really want, you know, I'm not sure if I want to instill any of that type of power or responsibility in an unelected official that works for the county, because that could get pretty dicey down the road. The other question that I had is there a way to just have, as opposed to specific architectural standards, to have sort of a baseline of what it's going to look like? I know that we've done that for commercial, where certain things, we will use, I think it's at Williamsburg colors, and signs will be this and this will be that, but it gives them the flexibility to develop, if they want, 40 red houses and 3 blue houses, they're not stuck to, no, you must have 33 of each. And I know that number doesn't add up, but it's, anyway. But I don't know why we as the government would be involved in the free market development of a neighborhood. Even when this came up and I had heard about it, I've never seen this before, even on my previous time on the board, of any of this such specific architectural guidelines that were being given. And I'm not sure why we would want to do that. And secondly, too, the market that would drive the price, I don't know if anybody has looked, but try to find a single-family house, from the courthouse north that is, 150,000. You can't find them. They're 250 and above. And so if he's trying to compete, especially with the other developments that are around the courthouse area, the market is going to drive what is being developed. And so putting in a poor product is very unlikely, because that will then lessen the profit margin, and there's no developer that's going to do that. So he wants to make as much money as possible, and he just wants the flexibility to move along with the market as it changes. And so I think that this actually wouldn't be a bad idea to do, especially as we've said, the market does change and tastes do change. And even as we've seen, they call them McMansions. They're not as in vogue anymore. People are going to smaller and apartments. Who would have thought 10 years ago apartments would have been the thing? So I think giving the flexibility on the architectural standards will allow him to compete in the market. Thank you.
Well, I agree with you, Mr. Yakubowski, but at the same time, I mean, and Mr. Gerald, I know you're an honorable man. I think you run a good business, but I mean, we do have to protect, the citizens that surround it. We have to protect, when promises are made, we got to have some sort of assurance that promises are going to be kept. And I think, it's not uncommon for sure for people to come and have amendments done. It's done just about every year by just about every single developer I know of. At least they're before us wanting to change something, and that's because markets have changed. I think where you got to get into is, the developers themselves, to be this specific, need to be cautious of themselves. If they know they're not going to be building, or, they got to realize the economies can change and, they can be stagnant for a period of time. But when you proffer stuff, I mean, in order to get a development of this size and this magnitude, I mean, we've got to hold them accountable and make assurances that they're going to build what they say they're going to build. And I've said again, Mr. Gerald, I support all those changes we spoke about in our meeting. I have no issues with those. But just to open it up where you could, I mean, or when you sell to a contractor or somebody who's going to build for you, I mean, instead of $250,000 homes, we'll have $100,000 homes. There is a difference there in quality and stuff like that is used. So I'm very cautious about agreeing to just a carte blanche. You can do what you want now. I would like to see staff come back with some, see what they can come up with, and see if both parties can reach an agreement that will still provide us some sureties, but at the same time give some flexibility. Because I do understand that, building materials, they change every day. Who would ever thought they're using the stuff now for rafters that is paper thin, basically? I mean, that's what I'd like to see. I'd make a motion that we table this till next, or do we need to make a motion?
No, I was just going to say, if you're going to make a motion to continue, I think there's been two items discussed here, and if depending on what Mr. Gerald wants to proffer, I think it would affect which meeting it goes to. We've had some discussions and looked at some language with respect to simply creating an HOA with basic parameters. But tonight, I think Mr. Gerald, as you've discussed, it seems like there's a possibility that there would be a proffer to exact changes with respect to those architectural guidelines. And to allow for that to happen, the proffers have to be submitted 14 days in advance. Not having those, I think we would need to go to the second meeting in October to allow for consideration of that.
Okay.
I think I have that right. Is that right, Kimberly?
All right. I know, but
you're taking a 10-month process and making it 11 months and continuing to go with kicking the same can down the road.
Yeah, but I didn't make the promises. And like I say, you can do. I mean, this opens it up to a lot of things. No porches, no garages. I mean, the list goes on and on. We were told it. Well, I wasn't on the board then, but the board at that time said that there would be certain standards and certain. Yeah, and I know that he wants it. I know the Geralds build a quality house. They do quality projects, but as the Livingston representative for the citizens out there, when we made promises, I want to make sure we have enough teeth to hold to those promises. It's just, I don't think it's fair to the citizens, and they certainly don't trust us enough as it is. And especially with the outcry of how we've allowed, and I say we as a board, has allowed all this building and construction going on as it is, that is, 15,000, 17,000, whatever it is now, homes able to be built, and then all the infrastructure issues that come along with it. When promises are made to us, we need to make sure that we can hold folks accountable and not just open it up carte blanche for people to do whatever they want, how they want, once they've made these promises. That's all I'm saying. I agree with all the changes he wants. But unfortunately, he's made these promises, and in order for us to try to figure it out and get it moved along, it's going to take to the second meeting in October. I don't want the delay. I'm sure he doesn't want the delay, but to protect our citizens, I just feel we just to let it go is not fair to them. I'd make a motion that we hold off till the second meeting in October, and we try to get both parties working on something that's amenable.
Mr. Chair. So I guess a question for you, Carl. I mean, so without us getting into the specifics, picking siding and picking shutters and various things, and I think it's been discussed about HOAs that have architectural review standards. Can he proffer that would maintain a certain level of standard? So if he established HOA with architectural review standards, within those standards provided to the county, that would lay out the quality that I think you're talking about, whether it's porches or brick front or some type of siding, and would they be able to bring that back as a potential for us to vote on that? That way it remains within the HOA or the Architectural Review Committee?
They can proffer, whatever's agreeable, or whatever they want to proffer. So they can come back with simply promising to establish an HOA, to maintain the common areas, to establish architectural standards without saying exactly what they are, what the eaves look like, what the shutters look like. So they certainly can do that, and they can certainly come back with the specifics that Mr. Benton has spoken about. So it certainly is up to them.
That, Mr. Chair, I kind of would like to see potentially, if he's amenable to that, he would bring that back to the county staff, and if they agree upon what he's presenting, that maybe we'll get a recommendation up or down from the staff for the next meeting if you table it till then.
Do we still run into the problem of the 14-day?
You can go to the next meeting. That's fine. What I'm worried about is with respect to the specifics. We don't have those. We currently have language that we've looked at with respect to what Mr. McLaughlin's talking about, because since he's already submitted that, he'll meet the 14-day requirement. If you want to get into specifics, what you're considering, we don't have that language. That hasn't been submitted yet, so he won't be able to meet the 14-day requirement to get to the next meeting in September. But if that's what the board wants to do, it'll simply just have to take it up in September and then, in the first meeting in October and continue it out one more meeting. I was just trying to avoid the board having to take it up again at the first meeting and then possibly continue it out to the second meeting in October. If you just go now to the second meeting in October, then I think you can account for either of those instances.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll amend my motion to, let's try it on the first meeting in October. I'd like to try to get this done. I know Mr. Gerald's had to go through this process and is delayed, I'm sure, what he wants to try to get done and the sales he wants to do and profit. But, and I apologize for any delay, Mr. Gerald, but I do have a responsibility for at least the Livingston citizens. That'd be my motion. Mr. Yakubowski, do you have a comment?
Oh, no, I was waiting for the vote.
Oh, okay. Anybody else in the discussion? Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
No.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
And chair's aye.
Thank you. That brings us next to the Jackson Village and Alexander's Crossing Special Service District item that has come back before you it is ripe for a vote.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Mr. Chair, based on, I think we need to continue to do some research on this SSD, so I would like to table this
All right.
indefinitely.
Motion to table indefinitely.
I'm motioning to table indefinitely.
Any comment, Mr. Yakubowski?
Yeah, I will not support a indefinite table. I think that it's not fair to the developers and the landowners to have something that is this large hanging out there over their head that we could implement at any time. If it needs to be brought back at a certain time in the future and board members want to do that, that's fine. But I would like to see it actually voted down.
Any other comments? We have a motion on the floor to table this SSD indefinitely. Mr. Yakubowski?
No.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
No.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
No.
Chair's aye. I think we can move on.
Brings us to the vote, Mr. Chairman, on R160009 Palmer's Creek LLC and Massaponax Land Company LLC. It's in the Lee Hill District.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This is just a quick recap for you. Palmer's Creek is a rezoning of approximately 25 acres from commercial 3 and rural to mixed use 5 with proffers to allow for a maximum of 400 multifamily units and a maximum of 40,000 square feet of commercial uses. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on August 15th and voted 4-1 to recommend approval, and staff is also recommending approval with the proffer statement. The board held a public hearing on September 11th and continued the vote to the meeting this evening. At the last meeting, the board raised several questions related to the school's CIP projects and student generation projections, and additional information on the modified continuous green T intersection design. Staff is prepared tonight to provide you that additional information, and we also have a representative from VDOT here to answer questions about the intersection improvements. After the board's meeting, staff requested updated student enrollment for the new apartment developments in the nearby surrounding area. We still do not have final enrollment numbers countywide, but the schools did provide us these unofficial preliminary figures for our discussion tonight, and they're provided on the chart before you. You'll see in the first table we have the apartment complexes listed, the total number of approved units, and the number of occupied units. At this time, only Overlook Terrace is 100% occupied. Based on these enrollment figures, staff calculated generation rates for elementary, middle, and high school students for multifamily units. The middle table shows the breakout of those occupied units between market rate and tax credit. Tax credit units are the low-income housing tax credit program, which is administered by the Virginia Housing Development Authority. You can see it's pretty close. It's 50-50 with just slightly more market rate units at this time. The last table shows the school generation rates that staff utilizes for our analysis, and I've circled these and color-coded to help you with the comparison from the rate that we estimate to what is existing. You'll see the elementary figures are circled in blue. The difference from staff's estimate to the actual enrollment is over 56% more. For middle school students, the difference is over 26% more than staff's estimate, and for high school students, the actual is 35% less than staff's estimates. If we use these actual enrollment generation rates, then the elementary students generated from the Palmers Creek development would actually push Parkside Elementary to be over capacity, which was not the case with staff's estimate. Included in your packet was the school's CIP sheet, which identifies out-year project needs with no timing or triggers in place. There is a middle school and a high school that are identified on that list, but it's very preliminary and there are no locations identified for either. Spotsylvania Middle School and Massaponax High School are both over capacity when comparing enrollment to capacity. However, the county's adopted CIP does not include expansions for either school or another project from which this development would receive a material benefit. Therefore, the county cannot accept a cash proffer from the applicant for schools. Moving on to transportation. Before you is a map of the Route 1 corridor with the Palmers Creek project identified by the star. To the north is an existing traffic signal at the Spotsylvania Parkway and Route 1 intersection, and to the south is another traffic signal existing at the Massaponax Church Road and Route 1 intersection. A traffic signal was proffered as part of both the Jackson Village rezoning and the Heritage Woods rezoning. These two signals, because they were proffered prior to the signal justification process, will not be required to go through the alternative design intersection process like Palmers Creek is. These two signals will be installed once warrants are met. With that, I'm going to invite Mr. Hedrick to come forward. Peter Hedrick is with VDOT's Fredericksburg residency as their traffic engineer, and he can provide us some more information on the continuous modified green T design.
Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Peter Hedrick, Fredericksburg District Traffic Engineer with VDOT. I'm not sure what you've heard on this design to date, but the point of the design that is proposed here is to accommodate traffic from the development without introducing another traffic signal on Route 1 that would impede the flow of the through traffic on Route 1. So with this design, the left turns out of the proposed project would turn into an acceleration lane on Route 1, and they could accelerate to speed on Route 1 and then merge into Route 1 traffic without necessitating Route 1 traffic to stop. We're looking at these types of intersections more and more to help address traffic flow on our arterial system. We're doing what we can to prevent degradation of arterials, such as what's happened on Route 3 and what has happened further up to the north on Route 1 in the Massaponax area, try to limit the amount of traffic signals and keep traffic flowing on the arterials. And that's the guidance that we provided to this developer in our review of their traffic study.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Thank you. A couple of questions. This was presented last time as though, or stated as fact, that there are none of these in Virginia currently. This is a new idea. It's coming from North Carolina.
There is one that's been constructed in Southwest Virginia. I've forgotten the exact location. It's fairly new. We did introduce a similar concept to this in Stafford County on Route 1, where a subdivision was asking for a traffic signal. We restriped the roadway to provide them with an area where they could pull out into the median and then pull into the then continue on from there so they could do a two-stage exit from the development. So there are a couple instances here in Virginia. They've been doing these in Maryland for 20 years. It's not an unusual traffic device to use to keep traffic flowing on the arterial roadways.
Right. Well, it's not unusual. Neither were roundabouts, but you know, in New Jersey, we've had them for years, and all of a sudden, somebody in VDOT thought that they should put them everywhere. And so, if you introduce a new idea and a new traffic concept to people that are not used to it, it's going to take some time to get used to it. I point to the one at the mall and the one on Fall Hill Avenue, how people just backed up and didn't understand how to use a traffic circle. So, but my question also is this cheaper to implement than a traffic light?
Not necessarily, because I mean they did have to build the extra width on Route 1 for the acceleration lane. So I'm not sure how those costs.
Okay, but it's not something that's substantially more than a traffic light. It might be in the ballpark.
It might be in the ballpark.
Okay.
Depends on right-of-way needs and those kind of things.
Okay.
I would point out that we're also doing this just up the road at Commonwealth Avenue, where we're putting in the new park and ride. There's going to be a median acceleration there also in lieu of a traffic signal.
And is that taper lane 200 feet also? Because 200 feet sounds like a lot until you actually get out there and you have to merge into the, 200 plus 200 taper, so a 400, total. But to actually turn out onto Route 1 and then go down that hill, and then you have people coming out from Jackson Village, is VDOT, and my question before was, is VDOT looking at this entire corridor with all of these fixes built upon each other and not individually? Because the other thing too at that this area is the sight lines that I'm concerned with. As you come Route 1 north, there is a curve in the road, and as you come Route 1 south, it does sort of go up. You're accelerating up a hill, and then the project will be on the right. So those would be my concerns, that we make sure that we're looking at this corridor in a collective way and not individually as, what benefits this and then what benefits that. I saw before that there was a light down at where Walton would be. So how does that then affect, an item like this? And I don't, if you don't have the question, those are just my concerns. I wanted to air more than ask a question.
We do try to look at the corridor in a comprehensive way when a project comes, such as this, in the middle of a corridor. What we need along this area is our left turn lanes and more control of access for what's already there today. There's a crash issue here, and I expect that this design that's proposed with the medians and this acceleration lane will actually help the crash issue that's been ongoing in this area.
Okay.
So we are trying to take a comprehensive look at things when the developer comes in, and that certainly helps our guidance of them and the improvements that they will do.
So we should be expecting more of these unique kind of traffic implementations that VDOT is trying to implement. And I understand it's not an easy job. I'm not trying to criticize that at all. I just want to make sure that what we are proposing actually works, and not for the short term, but helps alleviate that area. So thank you.
Any other comments from the board? Have you been out there?
Have I been out there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I regularly drive Route 1, yes.
Okay, and you know about the other developments in there in the area that are going to put more traffic up and down Route 1?
I live in Lee Hill.
Okay.
Very familiar.
Well, you're a little bit down from it, but my biggest concern is the amount of traffic coming down Route 1 and trying to maneuver people in and out of there. Why not just a regular continuous green T with the lights, other than you're trying to get rid of the lights? I'd rather have our lights and synchronized and ensure ingress and egress. And
as soon as you stop traffic on Route 1, right now you've got two lanes in each direction, through lanes. As soon as you put a traffic signal in there and stop the traffic to let traffic out of the side streets, you're going to start queuing traffic up, and then you have to get them started again. So what that does is it creates the need for more capacity at the traffic signal. We're going to have to build more lanes to get the cars through, the ones that do have to stop. So you would have to stop southbound traffic is what you're suggesting, to let them turn left out on a green arrow, presumably. It increases the delay to the Route 1 traffic, and there's, as soon as you know, every time you put a traffic signal in, that's what you're doing. You're increasing the delay.
Yeah, but
And
aren't you
we're trying to avoid
ensuring
that.
safety? I could care less about delay rather than.
There is no insurance for safety. Every situation is going to have some degree of, everything is reasonably safe is what we like to strive for, to make things reasonably safe. Nothing is completely safe.
Well, I agree with that. But
when
you put somebody in an intersection that's uncontrolled rather than controlled,
the-
statistically, I would think your chances of an accident are a little higher.
Statistically, the highest occurrence of crashes in Virginia is rear-end crashes. And most of those crashes occur at traffic signals.
Okay.
So put a traffic signal here in the 45-mile-an-hour zone is going to result in rear-end crashes on Route 1.
I'm just not.
We're
not convinced.
We're trying to balance. We try to balance operations and safety, and that's what it's about: keeping traffic moving in a reasonably safe manner.
All right. Any other questions from the board? How many trips were supposed to be in and out of here a day? Do you remember it all? And I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Kimberly.
2,271
In and out of there? Or just down?
to be generated from this development, from the Palmer's Creek development.
Okay. Well, that's my biggest concern is the safety of folks getting in. That's a lot of folks trying to get in and out of there. And then I'd assume, just like anybody else living in Spotsylvania County, most of us get north or south. And turning left out of there, and then you put, ambulances, fire trucks, delivery trucks, the heavier, even during construction, the heavier, slower vehicles trying to get out of there onto Route 1. I don't know. I think we're asking for some issues. Just my opinion. Yes, I'm assuming we're done since there's no other, unless somebody wants to make a motion.
Well, is there okay, we've already had the public hearing, so that's not going
Yep.
on. Yeah, I'd like to say a few words here. And that is, you drive down Route 1 today, and one of the situations I run to all the time, I'll be in the left lane heading south towards Massaponax High School, someplace like that, and we got Pick Apart to the left, and we have actually a corporation there that produces throughout the world some items there. And the biggest problem is they have to stop in the left lane. There's no turn-off lane whatsoever. And here are people doing, well, first of all, if they don't watch what they're doing, because many people are on telephones, and next thing you know, they see them stop, they pull to the right, didn't even give it consideration. With this type of layout, you're actually, I think, reducing that, because they have a specific area to be in that they can stop and wait until it's free to go in there and everything. The other thing I was going to say is, too, if there is a requirement for a stoplight, and this could be answered by VDOT, in the future, if there's a requirement for SPDOT, they could, and it was warranted, I guess is the word I'm saying, we could actually put a light in there and synchronize them, just like we do on Route 3. Okay? And so we get even less of a risk with a light there. But I don't think right now it would be warranted. And I believe the applicant has put a certain amount of money away. If the applicant may I ask the applicant to give me the correct figures? I mean,
You okay with it?
I mean,
Yes.
the applicant's here, right? Yes, sir. So I know that we talked about certain money, because the proffer legislation now doesn't allow us to actually put that money in as a proffer. I believe if you could explain what you've done in that amount is for future use if a red light or a stoplight there is warranted.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'm Sherman Patrick. I'm here speaking this evening for Virginia Properties and Bonaventure, the developers in this case. Mr. Skinner is correct. We have set aside in our own budgeting process the cost of installing a traffic signal at this location. In the event that when we go through the permitting process, VDOT determines that circumstances have changed or that their design preferences and policies have changed in a manner that would result in the requirement of a traffic signal. So we anticipated that that was a possibility, and so we have in fact escrowed that between the partners involved in this rezoning to make sure that the money is there. With respect to the exact amount, we've escrowed in that agreement, in that private agreement that's outside of the proffer, because it needs to be in this case, over $500,000 for transportation improvements. Now, not all of that would be for the traffic signal. That amount came from the fact that the configuration of the acceleration, deceleration lanes and tapers would be different from what they are shown in our general development plan today. So that's not a precise figure just for the traffic signal, but that would include the traffic signal and other modifications that might be necessary to make the signal operational and meet VDOT standards.
And a question for you is, how would the county, how could we hold you responsible for that? I mean, this is between you and a contractor, I guess, or whatever it is, but how does the county know for sure that money will be there? And what reference or what paper do we have to use in court or in any circumstance say, no, this is what you guys said you would do?
We're placed in a very difficult position with respect to that particular question, because what VDOT has told us is that they will not approve a traffic signal at this point. So anything that if we were to proffer a traffic signal at this location, it would be above and beyond what is being requested for the development of the site. So what we have is the private agreement between Massaponax Land, Virginia Properties, and Bonaventures and their role in this. Has an escrow agreement that covers and provides for that for, I believe it's 10 years.
10 years, okay. All right, so if in the next 10 years a light is warranted there, that will give us the right to request you put the light in.
It'll be subject to the VDOT permitting process, and we're
If
always
it's warranted.
subject to that. Yes, sir.
If it's warranted, that's fine. And I also would like to remind this board that they've also put $500,000 out there, I believe, to use 10, or somebody even said 20, but 10 firefighters or teachers or anybody, EMS, any of these people that they could actually use, and that money will go, if you will explain once again, the money I'm talking about is reduce the rent so that we can get some of our firefighters and stuff into a nice apartment there.
Yes, sir. What has been proposed is what we call a Hometown Heroes program. And that program would be administered by the Central Virginia Housing Coalition. We have a representative from that organization here that can answer any specifics about the program. But what Mr. Skinner said is correct. Essentially what it does is it takes an initial grant that would be put up by Virginia Properties and then be drawn down over a period of time wherein employees of Spotsylvania County would come to, they would make their application for the grant, and they could receive a grant of up to $250 per month to buy down their rent. And we believe this is consistent with the philosophy of a mixed-use development. We're talking about the traffic generation. Well, putting commercial and residential together in a mixed-use development reduces the number of trips that people need to make when they get out on the main highway. Similar to that, the philosophy is if we have more of our local government, first responders, and school teachers living in the community, then they are more accessible, and it improves their quality of life, and it improves the quality of life of the entire community. So that's the purpose of that program.
And just to make it clear, please, that money isn't to be used in any other. That is focused on Palmer's Creek.
Yes, sir.
They won't go there and then say, I went 2 miles up the road and I'm getting an apartment and I want to use it against that apartment. So there's a lot of benefits here. And I know that I think the way they put in the turn lanes there and egressing out and acceleration lanes will actually make it safer in that area than what we have today. Because right now we have one lane for turning left that is a high-speed lane. I would consider it the inside left lane. The right lane is I call it the medium speed or slow lane where people do the speed limit. Unfortunately, it's above that in the left lane. So I would make a motion that we approve R16-009 Palmer's Creek. And that would be along with the Matsbach Lands Company, LLC.
I just got one, just a clarifying question to you, sir. You say the money for a light would be available for 10 years? Is that what you were saying? So
Yes,
I'm clear on it, because last time it was, is that the build out for the project, 10 years?
Yeah, yes, sir, that's correct. And we believe that what would trigger the requirement for a traffic signal under the specifications from VDOT would be the development of an adjoining property that would also be using the cul-de-sac for ingress and egress.
All right, so basically you just have a 10-year build out, as long as VDOT doesn't say we need a light there during your build out.
That's correct.
The money won't be used for that.
Right.
Okay. Dr. Trammy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been waiting for some months to make this point. I did let the applicants know I might use them to make a point I've been waiting for a while to make. Last spring, the Freelance Star published a couple of articles and a follow-on editorial based on statistics that in our area, not specific to Spotsylvania, but in Central Virginia, there's a shortage of affordable housing. And this comes from the file of, I'm not making this up. The editorial reads in part, developers need incentives, perhaps similar to federal and state rehabilitation tax credits, etc. So the same folks who like beating us up for approving housing and for giving developers what they want too often, now want us to subsidize developers to build more housing. Well, I just want to say we don't need to subsidize developers. The market will meet the demand for affordable housing if local governments merely let it. I'm bringing this up in related to this project because the anticipated price of this housing is appropriate and is affordable to moderate income folks, and with the Hometown Heroes program that was mentioned, even more so. With the new proffer law, I think it's even more important to tie residential development to commercial development to make sure that we can pay for the services needed by the new folks who will be moving in. Most of the time on mixed-use developments, I've looked for a commitment that only X amount of housing would be built until the commercial side was built, and then so that it's phased in together. What I like about this proposal is that there's a residential developer and there's a commercial developer. So if they don't build the commercial side, one of the partners doesn't make any money. So I'm confident that they will build the commercial side. The market's tough out there for bringing in commercial enterprises right now, especially retail. But I'm confident they're in this to make money, so they're going to bring in the commercial side, and I support this proposal. Thank you.
Any other comments from the board? Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Skinner to approve the Palmer's Creek LLC, Matsbach Land Company proposal.
Mr. Chairman, is that with the proffers?
With the proffers.
Do we need anything else clarified? Carl, usually you step in right about now.
Kim beat me to it.
Okay. All right. Mr. Skinner, I'll start down your way. Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Dr. Trampy.
Aye.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
No.
Mr. Ross.
Nay.
And chair's nay. But you got it. Now we have staff presentation.
Yes, next up, Mr. Chairman, Jane Reeve, our IT director, is here on Information Services FY18 results. Also asked Jane to announce if she, to address, if she would, at least some brief comment regarding our, to my awareness, unprecedented email outage from last week. We're happy to have the system recovered. Jane, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I am here tonight to present our Information Services Fiscal Year 2008 review. But first, as Mr. Taylor mentioned, I would like to briefly address the rather extensive email outage that occurred last week. This outage was a result of maintenance work being performed and unfortunately a result of human error. The outage lasted approximately 3.5 days, with recovery efforts coordinated directly with Microsoft to ensure a full recovery. This was a particularly complex recovery due to the nature of the error, and it was only due to the skill and efforts of our networking staff and our support vendor working with Microsoft deep into the system that we were able to fully restore email service, returning the county to normal business operations. For the viewing public, I'd just like to note that if there was an email sent to the county between Tuesday 9/18 throughout this past weekend, please resend your email if you have not received a response, or reach out to the appropriate department or individual directly for assistance. So I'm going to pause there before I begin my presentation and make sure there's no questions from the board before I move forward.
Any questions from the board? Nope.
Thank you. May I have the floor computer, please? Okay, so I'm here tonight. This is a very lengthy presentation. I promise you this presentation will be brief. As I do every time I come up here, I bounce through some of it, but it's there for your information if you'd like. My very first slide basically reflects your most recent long-term strategic goals, and that is to make sure that you're aware that we're working diligently to make sure that whatever we do aligns within those goals that have been established by the board. In that regard, the top line, IT governance, people and culture, innovative technology, user experience, information security, and broadband expansion are some of the key categories that we look at, and we're going to ensure that those strategic plans are in line with the counties. Our goals for FY19 is to make sure that we are able to eliminate our legacy and antiquated systems and processes and move to new technologies. Over the next 2.5 to 3 years, we do expect the following to be implemented on modernized platforms in some form or fashion. Our real estate and personal property system, our public safety system, which includes our CAD system, our community development system, our GIS system, which is going to, by the way, become critical for a lot of these systems that we're implementing, new parks and recreation system, state taxes and business taxes systems, and of course, I've mentioned before, an upgrade to our county website. We will continue to drive process improvement, enhance our user experience, whether it be internal or external to the citizens and other entities and people that engage with the county. And I want to make sure that you recognize that we are very aggressively trying to maintain staff. This is not a Spotsylvania County issue. This is a nationwide issue for both private and public entities to find qualified technical staff. We have developed a very aggressive career path and succession planning and individual development plans, and we work to find them, we work to hire them, we work to train them, and make sure that we are able to keep them here once we've done all that, and that we create a good environment for them to grow within. On the next slide, as I think I've reported before, we are pretty much fully staffed at this point, which is the first time we've been fully staffed in a very long time. I want to note here that in line with what I just reported, we are trying to do, and we've been very fortunate to be able to do internal promotions as well as externally hire some very qualified folks that I think are going to serve this county very well in the future and moving forward with technology. These are just some stats that we go through. Unfortunately, with our email outage last week, we've kind of blown our availability for the year. So the next presentation you'll see will reflect that and go from there. We do continue to see an increase in the volume of the work that we do, the emails that we processed, how much we block, and so forth. I'm going to skip past this one, and I want to address this one very, very quickly, in that there's a couple projects on here that we have completed that I want to very quickly go over. One of them is number 4, the implementation of the image trend software. This is something that we've worked with the fire and rescue folks on. This is their patient care reporting software and some records management, and that is actually going live within the next few days, maybe the next week. And they're very excited to have this extension of what they already had through the state that now gives them what they need to improve their revenue recovery process as well as the records collection. There's some other training stuff that we've done for FREM. We've also implemented body cameras for the sheriff's office, and that project is moving forward very nicely as well too, or that implementation. On the next page, the main thing that I want to note is item number 23. We recently upgraded the size of our internet pipe, and that's really critical. We quadrupled the size of that pipe and actually it did not cost the county anything. We are now getting ready to quadruple the size of that internet pipe again based on all the technology we have coming into play. And again, I want to stress that that is at no cost to the county. We've been able to negotiate some very, very good cost that we have significantly expanded our capability to perform business without extra cost to the county or to the taxpayers. As you see at the bottom of the page, there's a lot of GIS work going on. Again, GIS is going to play a very integral and important role moving forward with most of these projects, and we have some pretty aggressive plans for where we're going with GIS to change it from our typical GIS to being very, very interactive and more heavily used within our systems. We're going to go past that one. On this one, there's a few projects I want to point out. The public safety radio system went live actually almost 2 years ago. We've been in production for, like I said, 2 years. That project, we are wrapping up the security part, cleaning up the towers, getting all the cleanup done after the project. That project will close out shortly. Tone paging is very, very pleased that we will eventually be replacing our very antiquated tone paging system with a new digital alert system, which will give fire rescue the ability to dispatch on a much different and more unique manner that will be more responsive to the needs of the community. That's anticipated to go live in November of this year. Our significant judicial security system enhancements should be done by the end of December. I do want to point out NG 911. You may be hearing a lot about this from a lot of different sources. This is not an option. We have to do this. This is where we are throughout the entire country, actually, that the 911 lines, transport lines, are being changed from analog to digital. And this is a major plan. We're very fortunate that the state will be funding this. I've had Bonnie set aside a little bit of money to make sure that if the state did not, we could still do this, but as of right now, it looks like the state's going to be funding that. But that is going to be a major project coming forward in the next year, and we are working those plans out now. That has to be coordinated with all of our other regional entities to make sure, because there's such a cross-connect between when someone calls 911. The real estate project will also go live January of 2019. Community development system will begin within the next probably month or so. That contract was just approved. New parks and recreation system will be going live. And then, of course, I've mentioned before, we will begin the upgrade of our county website. The next few slides are just for your information, so I'm not going to go through those. Just do want to point out two minor little items here. We do kind of keep track of what we do for public safety and then what we do for the rest of government. To date, the level of projects just over the last 4 years, we spent almost $1.9 million to implement technology in support of public safety. And we have spent almost $3.9 million in implementation in support of other county projects that have furthered either a enhancement to a system, implemented a new system, or added some value to existing functionality that we've not had in the past. That concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions if anyone has anything. Thank you.
Any questions from the board? Mr. Skinner?
It's actually not a question. It's just a thank you. Your staff has done an awful lot, shown by the statistics you've shown us with the money and everything. It's something that we need to keep updated for the safety and the security of not only the county but our citizens. And I just want to say thank you to you and your staff. You've always been very responsive to my needs, and I never had a complaint that you haven't been responsive to anybody else. So I want to just thank you for your work and your staff.
Thank you, Mr. Skinner.
Anyone else?
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Space needs, our favorite subject matter.
Can we have the floor computer, please? Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Ben Loveday and I are here tonight at the request of the board to update the board on several CIP projects and to get some direction on some of those CIP projects as well. The first project that we would like to give you an update on and that we also seek some direction on is the animal shelter expansion and renovation project. This chart depicts the overview of the funding allocated to the project to date. You'll note no funding was added to the project in the FY18 budget cycle. The total to date budgeted and appropriated for this project is $5,673,646. The current balance in the project is $5.2 million. Please note there's a change in this chart from what was originally put online, that $3,464,099 was added to the budget for the final design. The original slide had $3.79 million on it, which was the total after that $3,464,000 was added. Bids for this project were opened on September 19th. The apparent low bid is $5.93 million. Additional funding for the project was anticipated in the FY 2020 CIP in the amount of $1,076,313. If the additional funding is approved and appropriated in FY 2020, then the project will be within budget. Also note that these are raw numbers for the bids. They have not been verified as responsible or responsive. Once the bids are finalized, staff will be moving forward with the contract to move the project forward unless otherwise directed by the board. So the first question that I have for you this evening, does the board wish to continue with this project as presented? And if so, we'll be bringing back that contract in the next couple of months after it's been awarded and vetted through the county attorney's office.
Any questions, Mr. McLaughlin?
I guess the question is, do you need a motion to move forward or just a direction from the board to say?
No, I just need direction from the board. The CIP project has already been approved. There's adequate funding in FY 2020. So I just want to make sure that the board is all on board with moving this project forward.
Mr. Skinner?
Oh. Well, I'm good with it. Let's go forward.
Right. Mr. Skinner?
So Ed, if you would, bids have not been verified as responsible or responsive, okay? Could you sort of explain what that means? And you've got the low range is 5.93 million. Where is the variation? You've given us figures and you say it's not responsive, so I'm a little concerned that what are we looking at here?
Well,
And how much would it change once you've done verifying it?
Well, we received 6 bids. The lowest bid and the apparent low bid is 5.93 million. The high bid that we received was 7.51 million. All the other bids were in between. To verify the bid as responsible and responsive, procurement staff will work with capital construction engineers to make sure that all the requirements of the RFP and the bid have been met, and then we'll go ahead and start to negotiate the contract. At that point, the contract will be developed. It'll go through the county attorney's office and through procurement, and then we'll bring that contract back to the
So
board.
it's really to put the county and the contract on the same sheet of music. Understand what we're getting for the money.
And to make sure that the bid process was followed through the RFP.
Okay.
So that's where it's at.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments from the board? All right. I guess I can start. I'd say move forward at the 5.93.
That's correct.
Right.
The
low bid
bid was 5.93.
All right. I think
And if-
Mr. McLaughlin already said move forward. Mr. Yakubowski?
Well,
It's not a
do you-
motion, but
do you really need direction? I mean, it's already funded and moving and.
That's correct.
Okay.
It's already been approved. It's already funded. So I'm
All right,
just
let us know
making
when the
sure that-
groundbreaking is.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank
I think you got direction.
Okay. Thank
Unless
you.
anybody wants to speak up with objection.
I
you.
appreciate
There you
that,
go.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
The remainder of these projects that we're looking for direction on tonight are all related to future needs of the general county government workspace. This chart depicts the projected total usable workspace for all county government offices, with the exception of those listed. Staff recognized that the work that was done in 2013 was constrained. So staff conducted an internal survey of its own of general government department heads to gain a better understanding of projected needs. This survey was done independently of the 2013 study. When the board had its retreat in May of this year, I had mentioned that we had done an internal study at that time. Square footage and staffing numbers from Chesterfield, Henrico, and Stafford County were used as comparison of our peers to support analysis of the survey. It appears from both the 2013 work and the staff independent survey that the county will need an additional 25,000 to 30,000 usable square feet of space somewhere within the next 20 to 30 years. Depending upon several factors, it appears that the current workspace allocations are adequate for at least the next 5 years. And with some interim modifications to existing buildings, it could be adequate for as much as the next 10 years or more. Separate studies will be conducted for those entities excluded, since most of those occupy space in their respective locations, and that space is used exclusively for their operations. The general government figures include all other governmental offices, to include the Treasurer's Office and Commissioner of Revenue. The 2013 space needs identified the need for 2 large meeting spaces. These needs are also excluded from the 2013 numbers, as well as the 2018 survey that we did, because there's ample large meeting space available in the school's maintenance facility adjacent to the Marshall Center, which is being utilized by county departments as necessary now. The use of these large rooms came about as a result of the cooperative efforts between the school division and county staff. That's the numbers have been adjusted based on the large meeting spaces that are available, and county departments are actually using that space. We've had several meetings there since we worked out with the schools the use of that joint use of that space. So this is just to give you an idea moving forward of what the county's needs are going to be. Somewhere in the 20 to 30-year time frame down the road, we're going to need somewhere between an additional 25,000 and 30,000 square feet. This only included the three buildings, the three main governmental office buildings. That's the Holbert Building, the Merchant Square Building, and the Marshall Center. The next slide provides a summary of the timeline associated.
Hold on,
Oh,
Mr.
I'm
Skinner.
sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to ask a question. You said there's adequate, but is it efficient? I mean, do we have efficient places to move people where the government becomes more efficient? Adequate means we can put them in any place, but how does it affect the efficiency of this county, staff, all that? Have you looked, is that possible? Are you saying that we have adequate and efficient if we move people around? Do we have a plan to know where we make that move to adequate, but with the best efficiency we can?
I understand what you're asking.
Well, let's put it this way. That's a question I have. I don't have to have the answer tonight.
Right.
Maybe you can take some time, and with what you've presented us tonight, you come back and say, yeah, we think it's adequate, we think it's efficient because we could move here, and stuff of that nature. Because adequate and efficient are two different things. And efficient to me is the most important thing for this county.
And I understand, Mr. Skinner, and I think moving forward with this presentation, we may be able to answer some of those questions.
Okay.
Or that question.
Thank you.
And I'll just interject real quick. So it's the Marshall Center, Holbert Building, and Merchant Square that you used?
That's correct. That's the 100,000 usable square feet, as those three buildings.
Okay. And the board still hasn't decided exactly what they want to do with the Marshall Center as far as its use and rehabilitation.
Well, that's coming later in the presentation.
Okay, I'm
as
jumping
well.
ahead
I
of.
think
Sorry.
I think that goes along with some of Mr. Skinner's.
I got to learn to be a little bit more patient. Sorry.
Well, I think if I may jump in, Ed, I think the key point at this point in what staff has put together is the collection really of three data points: the 2013 study that we had, the survey that was done this year, and then also the analysis done based on comparator jurisdictions that for various reasons were identified as similar to us or similar in trajectory for us in terms of growth and staff development. And what we found is those three measures together really validate one another. So there is no perfect measure, and we don't have a crystal ball about the future, but looking at it three different ways over several years of time now, we see about the same need looking into the future.
That's correct. Thank you, Mr. Taylor, because we did, with the internal survey that we did in-house, we actually backed some of those numbers that we got by the square footage and based upon projections that was given to us by each of the department heads using numbers from Chesterfield, Henrico, and Stafford. We were able to look at the average square footage per office per employee, Mr. Skinner, to get back to your question, and then determine approximately how many employees or additional employees we could use or put into existing space with some interim modifications to some of the buildings. And that's where I'm going with it. This is the timeline for some of the discussions that we've had. 2013 was the original space needs study. Then in February and March, we had some CIP follow-up discussions with the board. And then in May, we talked a little bit about some workspace needs for the county at the board retreat in May. The next project that I'd like to give you an update on is the demolition of the old sheriff's office and stabilization of the historic courthouse. The project's within budget and on time. I'm not looking for any further direction from the board. The negotiated low bid on this project was $1,019,988. It's within the expected budget, or within the budget that we had for the project. We'll be bringing this back to the board on the consent agenda sometime in October. That work is going to begin in November, December, and we're going to minimize any impact on the holiday festivities that we have here at the courthouse. The Judicial Center expansion and renovation project will be advertised for bid in the next few weeks, with anticipated bid openings this December or early January. This project will require the relocation of the museum annex by the spring of next year. And I am seeking confirmation from the board on the move of the museum annex over to the Merchant Square building. The Judicial Center expansion renovation is 38,000 square foot courthouse expansion with light renovation to existing spaces. Moving on to the museum annex relocation. The board authorized staff to move forward with the move of the museum annex to the first floor of the Merchant Square building at the May 9th, 2017 meeting. The renovation work to complete that move was near completion when we heard from some of the board members that may be other thoughts for the use of that space. Staff explored the option of moving the museum and the annex to Lick Run Community Center. There's roughly an additional $50,000 of additional work that will need to be completed on the first floor of Merchant Square to allow the annex to move there as originally directed. To move the museum and annex to Lick Run would cost between $150,000 to $350,000 for renovation to the Lick Run Community Center and adjacent buildings to house the displays and the museum annex. The community center space will be lost as the current community center will be converted to a museum visitor center. This idea was first proposed years ago in a study conducted by the county for future use of the Lick Run property. In an effort to help the board in making a decision on the future of the museum annex location and future additional general government workspace needs, we've developed a flow chart that we're going to bring up here in a minute. But what I'm looking for from the board is, do we move forward as directed in 2017 with the museum annex to go to the first floor of Merchant Square, or would you reconsider? Do you want to reconsider and move that to the Lick Run Community Center? If you can bring the next slide up, Ben. So the question is, what's the desired use of the first floor? The museum annex is slated for the unfinished area. The conversion was placed on hold. It does, the office space use for the first floor, there's a couple of options there for finishing additional office space on the first floor. We could do a complete upfit of the unfinished area to office space, which would get the county probably 10 years, maybe more down the road. The entire first floor of Merchant Square is a lot of open space and foyer. We could do a complete rework of the entire first floor area by moving the museum to Lick Run Community Center and converting all of that space down there to office space. That'll get you 15 to 20 years down the road with the conversion of that without a new building until the 20 to 25 year or 30 years down the road that I presented in that first slide. So there's some options here. Again, we're not busting at the seams right now. There is some additional space on the first floor that's being converted to office space. With a complete rework of that first floor, we estimate that we could probably get as many as 50 workstations with a rework of the first floor onto the first floor for future space needs.
Mr. Ross?
Ed, have you looked at the use of the museum as it is now and potentially if it went out to Lick Run? Has anybody looked or guesstimated if we'd get more visits to the museum if it was on Route 3?
I talked to Terry Doherty, the museum curator, about that. Terry is of the opinion that he would probably get more visitation out there because it's closer to the battlefields. But I don't have numbers to verify that either way, Mr. Ross.
Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman. Ed, Talk about timing a minute, though. You said a couple of slides ago that the annex has to move somewhere by the spring in order.
That's correct. The annex does have to move by the spring. So what I'm looking for from the board is whether or not we go ahead and move that museum annex into the space that was originally directed for us to move the museum annex there on the first floor of Merchant Square. The space that we have currently on the first floor of Merchant Square that could be converted outside of that space for the museum annex will probably get us at least 5, maybe 10 years down the road for additional workspace that could be put there, since we don't need the meeting space there. We've got the large meeting space with the schools over at the facility next to the Marshall Center. So without having to use that large conference room for a conference room, we can convert even more of that space to cubicle or workstation areas.
Mr. Ross?
I know we have 7 board members and 7 different opinions up here, but I think moving to Lick Run would make a lot of sense, and it keeps, gets more visits to the museum, sounds like. At the same time, it keeps space that's limited out here that we already have built available for use for staff and not for museum use. So that's what I prefer.
I guess you need us to pipe it in now on what you want us to do.
Yeah, can you bring the next, yeah, you can go straight to the, so the first floor use
I'll get you in a second.
is either museum annex or office space. That's kind of the guidance that I'm looking for, at least between now and the springtime when we have to move it. The renovations for Lick Run will take at least 2 or 3 months, maybe more. The first floor to finish it for office space, probably an additional couple of months to get it ready, depending upon what the board wants to do. If you look at office space, there's 2 options that we had looked at. One is the partial, which would probably meet a 10-year need, from $200,000 to $400,000. If you do that option, you're probably going to still need a new building in the 2025 to 2030 CIP to meet the 25 to 30-year need. We're projecting cost then to be $11 million for that building. If you do a full renovation to the first floor for about $1.5 million, that'll delay the need for a new building to 2030 to 2035 at a cost of $13 million. We used a 4% inflation, construction inflation. If you do the museum annex on the first floor, you could still meet the 5, probably more than 5 to 10 year need for $50,000, and a new building, depending upon what you do at the Marshall Center today, would cost you $8 million. I'm not suggesting that we move in that direction. I just had the number up there to give you that number for building a new building today or within the next 5 years.
Mr. Cole?
Yeah, just to clarify, when you talk about the full renovation of the first floor, that would include totally reconfiguring that first floor and utilizing the large foyer there for office space.
That's correct. Yeah, that large foyer would go away. Museum annex would not be there, and the museum would be moved. So all of that museum space, the Willow Run, the old Willow Run space that's there, all of that would be converted and reconfigured to office space and workstations.
Mr. Yakubowski?
Thanks. A little while back, we had heard that we need a new social services building. We heard that other departments were busting at the seams. There was some outcry, and then all of a sudden it comes back and we don't need to do those things. So what has changed?
Well, we moved the we moved facilities maintenance out of the Marshall Center. And the space that was being used by facilities maintenance is now being used exclusively by the finance office and IT. So we moved the facilities maintenance folks over to the old Capitol Construction Building. So they're being housed there now. That's one change. The future for facilities maintenance will be combined with utilities public works. When we do an expansion of the utility public works, we would like to put all of that staff at one location. So that buys us time at the Marshall Center for the finance department and IT. And then there's some additional offices on the first floor. The voter registrar's office moved from the building out back over to South Point. So we could conceivably move the extension office, which is over at the Marshall Center, over to where the voter registrar was in the future and still create more office space in the Marshall Center, which gets us even further down the road. So that's changed as well.
But have you touched on all of the stuff that we need to do to keep the Marshall Center and update the Marshall Center? So
I'm getting there.
We'll get
that's the next slide coming up.
Oh, I thought it ended at 11. Okay, go ahead.
No,
But
no.
before we go to the next slide, Ed, Mr. Yakubowski, may I jump in with a point, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
And that's simply that I think there were two factors to your question about need for space. One is it's a matter of what horizon that you're looking at. And if you'll notice on this slide, the three lowest blue boxes are still, on the decision tree, are still looking ahead on the horizon that we will need additional space, significant additional space down the road. And one of the great speculative questions is how quickly or in what direction will building costs change over time versus what is our finance situation at present. The other, I think, significant change or notable change in the comprehension of need, at least in the short term, was through the work collaborating with the schools, identifying the asset of large and capacity of 125, if I recall, right. Meeting space, and having meeting space finished for up to 50 at Berea Church, and having a second smaller shared space with the schools. We can accommodate through those adjustments meeting needs in other locations, and that lets us flex meeting space on the first floor of Merchant Square into more workspace, which is, back to Mr. Skinner's point, a more efficient way to do business.
Just got to, talking about efficiency, but does that place personnel efficiently? We're seems like we're move this one here, move that one there. Meeting Place in Berea, I can't say that. I can never say that church name right. What's the name?
Berea.
Berea Church. Then you're looking at parking or either walking.
Right.
As long as it's not in the winter, it's not snowing, raining, or anything else, you're good. But is there a game plan, or does anybody have a game plan where personnel would best be used for efficiency for not only the citizens, but for staff? I guess is what I'm asking. Health department, social services kind of go together. I'm assuming, I can blurt out anything just about and just kind of.
Yeah, what we looked at, Mr. Benton, wasn't necessarily department specific. So that we are looking at perhaps shuffling the deck, if you will, to become efficient, to become
we do that
those
regularly.
units together.
I'm used to it.
But and like Mr. Taylor said, what we're looking at is different time horizons. So there are some interim strategies here for providing additional space for all these general government offices. It's not just one department. So it may mean moving departments around to be more efficient, as we've already done, to answer Mr. Yakubowski's question. So that's part of you know, what we're doing in the interim to try to get us further down the road before we absolutely have to build a building, if that's the choice, or if that's the decision of the board.
Okay, thank you. I guess you're waiting for a decision on whether to...
No, not necessarily, because we can talk about the Marshall Center.
Let's go with Marshall Center
and then we
first.
can come back and decide
Trent, did you have
ultimately. Really tonight, what I was looking for tonight was affirmation to move forward with the animal shelter, and the second was to get either affirmation to move the museum annex, or come up with a different game plan and get direction as far as what you want me to do with the first floor Merchant Square. That's what I'm looking for tonight.
Ed, on that list, can we get into focus a time frame for when you'll absolutely need a decision on the museum annex relocation, so that we're not in our own way with the courthouse expansion?
Well, that's it. We need to move the museum annex somewhere before February.
Okay.
And,
so
and
a
if
decision...
we go to Lick Run as one option, we're going to probably need at least 2 to 3 months to do whatever renovation we need to do there before we can move the annex. The same thing with if we decide to finish the first floor space to put the museum annex in there, at least in the interim, to get us through, say, the next 5 to 7 years, 10 years, and put the museum annex there and leave it there. In order to finish what we had started, we probably need another couple of months to finish that space.
A month or so.
About a month to do that.
Mr. Yakubis.
A question on the Lick Run. So are you talking about taking the community center and converting it, and then also converting another one of the buildings that are there and
Yes.
renovating it?
The old dairy barn next door would become the museum annex.
And do you need all that space? I mean, is there no way to leave the community center and renovate, or do you just not have enough room with
There's
that?
not enough room. We would need both buildings.
Have you looked into how much it would cost to add on to that building so that we still keep the community center there? Or is that just?
I did not. I just
Okay.
looked at
And then-
renovating what we had there rather than build a new building.
And then there's a
out there.
farmhouse there too, right? And
There is.
Is that currently being used, or is that storage? I think, is it storage?
It's empty.
It is empty.
It is not in very good shape. It's been used for
Okay, so that can't be.
training and some other things.
So it
Yeah,
can be converted at all, and
I don't have renovation costs for that. I don't know to what extent we could use that building or whether that building would have to come down.
okay. No, I just knew that it was there, so I didn't know if it had been looked at or not. Because if we can keep the community center, or at least keep that function out there, then it adds value, I think, to that whole area. In addition to having the museum there. Thanks.
Mr. Skinner.
I just would like to, I concur with Mr. Ross as far as moving to Lick Run, and that's because if you look at who goes into that building every day, it's developers, it's contractors trying to get permits. And I know that it is used during holidays and when we have these big festivals out here. But they're probably more closer to the Civil War and being used there just seems the logical thing to do. And as Mr. Yakubowski said, let's take a look at what it could cost to expand that so we don't lose the community center. We really have a good combination of a museum and a center there that people can use. And I certainly think we should put our museum where it's going to be seen the most and used the most.
Okay. The existing buildings that are out there, if we leave the community center as a community center, there is not going to be enough room in the dairy barn. The dairy barn is really the only building out there that could be renovated. Otherwise, we'd be looking at, and again, I'm not sure how much of the old farmhouse could be used. It could be used maybe for a couple of offices out there, but it certainly would not suffice for any type of museum or any type of function like that. So we would probably be looking at building a new building out there, if that was the direction the board, or if that's something the board wants us to look at.
So I know that when Cortland District lost the community center there on Wallace, is that it? Just
Yeah, it was just
Harrison
off-
Road, we
right.
earmarked that money and have kept it in arrears. Is it
It's roughly
$625,000?
$625,000, as I
So I mean,
recall.
that would be an option that we could maybe build one there. Do you know, my understanding is that the community center that's there was not used that much and that it actually had a lot of needs just for like restrooms and handicap access. Is it used much, or do you have those records? I know Kevin's not here.
I do have the records.
Okay.
I don't have them with me. However, we have added some portable facilities out there that increased the number of people that we can use that community center now. Because it only had one restroom in it before, I think it was limited to 25 people or
Right.
less. With the facilities that we have out there now, I believe it can hold 100 to 125, if I'm not off the top of my head. So I don't know if the usage has gone up
Be good to
since we
know.
put the facilities out there or
Sure.
not.
Okay, thanks.
But I can certainly look at that
Okay.
as well.
Well, if we're going to have what would you use that community center for, specifically for the museum?
That would house the museum.
But you had the barn. You said that's going to hold.
The old dairy barn will hold the museum annex. That's all the artifacts and workshops that go along with the museum artifacts for storage of. The county has was it like 3,000 artifacts. Yeah.
So it houses staff and then the regular displays and kind of
Right.
like what's over there now.
Yes.
Then if you had that stuff in there, you certainly wouldn't want to use it for any kind of community center.
No, that's correct. If we turn it into the museum, it won't be a community center any longer. It'll be the museum.
All right.
And that's the $150,000 to $350,000 estimates that we have, is to convert the community center to the museum and to convert the old dairy barn into the museum annex.
Okay.
I'll certainly look at some other options for Liquor Run then, if that's.
Maybe tearing
if the
down the
board is
barn,
interested.
the house, and building the community center there.
Yeah, I also have to look to see whether there's any kind of restrictive covenants for what could or could not be built out there as well. And I know there's some issues with drain fields and things like that, so I'll have to look to see what can be done and see if there's any restrictive covenants on the property, since the property was given to the county.
Okay.
But
Mr. Chairman.
I will further research that and get back with the board on that.
Mr. Marshall.
Just a quick suggestion, when you're looking for a new community center spot, we did have a firehouse there at Company 5 on Route 3. That's been relocated. That old building is there. I think it may be, it's owned by the volunteers, but that may be something we could talk with them to make that's an existing building, but may be easier to rent. It'd be maybe cheaper to use that as a community center and make some renovations to it than to build a new building. And it's within close proximity of it. Maybe just an option to look into.
We can certainly look at that.
All right, Ed, you can
Any other discussion on Merchant Square? Okay. The Marshall Center, the board asked me to come back, or asked us to come back with a minimum improvement plan as to what it would cost minimally to put into the Marshall Center to keep it with its existing use, not to add any additional office space to it. So with an HVAC as-is replacement, that's a two-season system. We'll replace the boilers and a separate cooling system and replace the outdated load centers there for the electrical and do some LED lighting, renovate the upstairs bathrooms and the associated supply piping, replace some of the ceiling grids, and remove the lockers. To do that, it would cost $3.5 million. And these were estimates that were obtained from our on-call contractors. We had them come in, look at what needed to be done. So the time frame for that $3.5 million investment, if we run the boilers and the HVAC systems to the end of their useful life and run them till failure, we could probably get by within 5 years, maybe even run them longer. In the current building CIP, we do have $350,000 in FY21, and we also have $5.5 million in FY23 in anticipation of replacement of those of the HVAC units and the other MEP upgrades. The difference between the $3.5 million, which is the minimum, and the $5.5 million, the majority of that is in the type of HVAC system that would go in there. Right now, the current systems are really not efficient. There's no temperature controls in the rooms, and you've got a boiler system that heats in the wintertime and a separate air conditioning system that cools in the summertime, and you have to convert from one system to the other system. So you've got times of the year where it's cold outside, but the air conditioning's on because we've already switched over. So in order to put a more modern, efficient unit in there, you're looking at about a $2 million upgrade to put more efficient heating and air conditioning in that building. There's some additional cost options available. Some board members had mentioned backup power in light of some of the power outages that we've had, and then fixture and furniture, based upon whatever use goes in the building. So again, I'm sorry.
Mr. Skinner.
Quick question. The removal of the lockers, is that because we would consider putting office space in the hallway? Or is it, what is the removal of the lockers for, please?
No, it actually wouldn't be creating any additional office space. That's basically just to improve the aesthetics of the building. As you go down through there, a lot of the lockers have been removed or collapsed in, and you can see what they call the chicken litter plaster flooring or the concrete flooring below it. So it's basically just improving the aesthetics of that building.
I would, that's a historical building. And I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm just saying consider it, because I don't want to take the historical value of that building away if we can save some of it or something of that nature. What does that, in your big plan, do you know just what the cost for removing the lockers are?
We kind of lumped together some of those aesthetic improvements into an estimate that would include various ceiling grids, the lockers, doing some painting and repair work, flooring, and we just basically put about a $500,000 placeholder on that, just because we don't know as we go into asbestos abatement and things like that we find as we move forward. And we haven't really set on a game plan for removing the lockers, but it's been something that staff has brought up, at least users of the building that brought up in the past. So we looked into some options of trying to figure out how to mitigate it.
Okay, I'd like consideration as far as how much of a historical site it is, and what do we really want to do with it without ruining that historical atmosphere. Let's put it that way.
Mr. Marshall.
As far as the lockers go in the building they're not by any means historical lockers. They're stuff that was put in there fairly recent when it was used as a high school, but lockers haven't changed. If you go to Massaponax High School, or they're a little bit smaller now than what they were then. What's there, the tops of them are collapsed, and it's actually it's a cleaning issue. It's a dust collector is what it's doing with the way it's collapsed. It's hard for any staff to get in there to clean those lockers, especially upstairs.
We could always look at an option of leaving some of them or a couple of the rows in place on the first floor, as in terms of, trying to showcase the history of the building and where it's been and where it's come from. So there's options we can talk about, even if we talk about removal on the second floor, perhaps to keep some on the first floor or something like that.
All right, you can move forward.
Just go ahead. Again, the minimal renovation plan will probably get you out to the 10-year need. This doesn't include adding into any additional office space, but because we've moved some offices out of there, and we do have the ability to make additional space by moving the extension office out of there to the old registrar's office, we think we could probably get at least 5, maybe 10 years out of that $3.5 million renovation. Again, it comes down to the bottom line is, again, in the future, we're going to need a building somewhere out to meet the 25-year need.
So I think at some point we need to have some discussion about exactly what, are we going to continue to kind of have multi-use in the Marshall Center as far as personnel slash, a community center? Or we just make it into a community center? And of course, the library continues, I would think.
Yeah, eventually down the road, we're going to outgrow the office space there. And we've already determined it's going to not be cost effective to try to convert any of that space that we have there, by doing additional renovation. So as we outgrow that space, and when we do build a new building, I would anticipate that IT and finance would be leaving that building for more modern space, and that building would become entirely for community use. Some of the ideas that we've talked about is expansion of the Snow Library. I know the library had expressed some interest already about expanding. So you've got that use. You've got the auditorium there that could be used by local theater groups. CYT, for example, could use it. Most of the first floor now is being used by Parks and Rec. We have the teen and senior center there. The gymnasium is being used for sports and recreation. So I would anticipate that the remainder of the building would also become a community building. We would find uses for those offices that are vacated up on the second floor when the new building, whenever that may be, is built, and those offices will be relocated.
Yeah, I agree. I like the community center aspect of it. And I think when you're looking at this, at some point, we need to look at redoing that auditorium. I mean, that's
right.
And especially with the seniors areas, I mean, that could, nothing against the building, but it's an old building. I know it's been worked a couple times, but it sure would, we could get it looking a lot better. Right. And I think if we do it, we need to do it right.
Right. It has, recently, within the last 5 to 7 years, it does have all brand-new windows. The roof has been redone. A lot of the drainage issues around the building have been taken care of. And I'll be the first to admit that, during the budget downturn, the economic downturn and tight budgets, one of the line items that was, reduced was, facilities asset maintenance budgets.
I can understand.
So there's some deferred maintenance there that needs to be done.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Ms. Moore.
I believe the auditorium, and Ben, you might be able to help me out on this, that there was money to redo the auditorium, and then I don't believe it was in this year's budget, was in a CIP for next year?
Yes, sir, I believe there is in Park Restoration.
I think the $350,000 in FY21 was meant for the auditorium.
For the auditorium, okay, so it's there, we just haven't got there yet.
Right. Right. Mr. Yakubowski.
So I guess what we're looking at is when are we going to spend the money? Because if we're going to turn the Marshall Center into a true community center we're still going to have to upgrade it. We're still going to have to do things to it. Maybe not as much, but there still will have to be money expended to do that. Then we have to look at, in my opinion, what is the most efficient way to use our space. You said that we have roughly 100,000 square feet, and that's not really looking at if those spaces and those uses are next to where they need to be. And so then do we build new buildings? Do we renovate what we have? Do we expand upon what we have? And then the other thing that wasn't touched on was the parking lot that's next to the Merchant Square building. As those vehicles need to be out of there because they'll be building, you know, where do you put them? How is it efficient to get people to their vehicles and back, and safety, and all those concerns kind of fit into it. And that's why I've always talked about what we need to do is have a 25, 30-year vision for what the courthouse area is going to look like, and then you work backwards. And if you don't hit your population projections, which I noticed Weldon Cooper was pretty off
Right.
from what they had,
Right.
you know, anticipated, which is a good thing because then we don't have to expend the money. But at least we know what we might need to do, and we can change the plan and we can tinker with it as we go along. But if we sit back and say, well, we're going to deal with that later, and we keep putting Band-Aids on it, the price tag will rise because eventually you're going to need to do it. And one of the other things that has been talked about, and I know I've mentioned, is the school board offices, the administration building, to be moved down into the heart of the county. And, you know, that's a whole nother millions of dollars to do that, and where would that go and how would that look? But in 30 years, it's probably going to happen, maybe. So if we have that long-term vision and then we work back from that, I think that would answer a lot of the things, because then we can make the decisions of what we need to do in the next 4 or 5 years. And as those 4 or 5 years come, we'll see if we need to do the next 4 or 5 years, or if those projections that we had were off, so we can push those things into the future. But kind of, you know, putting a Band-Aid here and there, I don't think it's going to work, because I think we need to prepare for the future. Thanks.
I'll just say to the county staff, I would like to see at some point, certainly not tonight, in the near future, maybe your vision, y'all's vision, Mr. Cole, Mr. Petrovich, and Mr. Taylor, your vision of what would most efficiently, where would you want staff that would be most efficient for not only yourselves and other county departments that work together, but also our citizens. So they're not having to go to the Marshall Center for one thing and drive down to the Merchant Square for another, and then they got to come over to the Hobart Building for something else. Just your vision of the best placement of departments and personnel to best serve not only yourselves and the supervision of departments, but also our citizens.
We will continue to have those discussions.
Sure.
We've had those discussions. Again, it hinges on the timeline that we're looking at. If we're going to look at building a building in the next 10 years, then, what we need to do in the interim is.
No, I just want y'all's,
but
if you have all the money in the world, how would you have it done right now? What is your vision that would best suit yourselves as administrators?
Right.
And our citizens?
Right.
To make things easier and more accessible to them.
Okay.
Just here's our dream world.
Okay. We can
type
certainly
thing.
do that.
Right. There's no timeline, so just.
Okay.
Here it is. Here's how we would have it if we could do it today.
Okay.
I guess we can keep on, Mr. Clump. Anyway, you can keep on getting it, or are you done?
I think that completes where we had what we had planned to do this evening. We'll certainly come back to the board in the near future, because we do need to make a decision about the museum annex. So we'll get some numbers together for Lick Run. Okay. And we'll also get maybe a better conceptual plan for what to do with the first floor of Merchant Square in the interim, if you want to look at putting the museum annex there for the next decade. what we could do to expand office space there, and we'll come back with a clearer vision for the courthouse area as well.
Right. Well, I've heard at least 2 supervisors talk about Lick Run for the museums. I don't know whether it's still.
Mr. Chairman, given the time frame we have with this museum by the February 2019,
You cutting close?
and you throwing December in with the holidays and November with the holidays, we're going to be really pushing staff on time. If the rest of the board would like, I'm willing to have the discussion and we make a decision on that this afternoon.
You want to do like the temporary fix with the 50,000, then we can make a better decision on whether, when, or if we're going to move it to Lick Run, or how you, Mr. Yakubowski?
I would venture to say that we're going to move it to Lick Run. It's the one, at least in my opinion, that makes the most sense. So let's just go for it and do it. If there's obviously the 4 that want to do it.
I agree. Lick Run was the right answer.
There's 3.
Yeah, I'm for it.
I guess there's your direction. Lick Run seems to be the direction you're being given for the museum for Lick Run.
And the annex.
Can I ask the
And the
board?
annex.
Can I ask the board to give me a vote on that, please?
Yeah.
I'll make well, it's Mr.
Sure. Motion to approve moving the museum out to the Lick Run
And the annex.
and the annex of the museum.
All right, motion by Mr. Ross to move the annex and museum to Lick Run. Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Dr. Trampy.
Aye.
And chair's aye. Boy, that was easier than what I thought it was going to be.
Thank you, gentlemen.
I guess, and you'll bring us back something for, I think we wanted like another recommendation for where and for possible community center out there also at some point.
We will certainly take a look at that. And Mr. Marshall, I'll follow up with you on the volunteer center, the old volunteer building out there. Okay. I'll certainly follow that up.
Is there any other directions or concerns for the board? All right, you got your direction.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Mr. Chairman, that brings us to closed meeting. Carl?
All right, Mr. Chair, this resolution will be to adjourn into closed meeting. Whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors desires to adjourn into closed meeting for discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific public officers, appointees, or employees of the county, specifically a member of the Board of Supervisors, the Director of Department of Social Services, and the County Administrator. And whereas pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2, 3711A1, such discussions may occur in closed meeting. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors does hereby authorize discussion of the aforementioned matters.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Dr. Trampy.
Aye.
And chair's aye.
Whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2, 3712D of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by this board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law, now therefore be it resolved that the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors hereby returns to open meeting and certifies by roll call vote that to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from the open meeting requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act and identified in the motion to convene into closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting.
Mr. Skinner coming
Aye.
your way. Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Dr. Trampy.
Aye.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Chair aye. Motion to adjourn.
Aye.
We're adjourned.